When ordinary people think of autumn, they imagine shorter days, cozy fires, curling up with a great piece of literature, and basking in the warming scent of cinnamon with shades of burnt orange, which your other half has decided to spend the life savings on to decorate the home for only 2 months, just as God intended. Yet we must remember that this transition into the frosty abyss of winter creates the perfect conditions for the spread of the pathogen known as Halloween. This disease causes people to dress like demons and go door to door asking for free stuff. This public service announcement aims to give you the correct tool to help you deal with these contagious commie behaviours when they manifest in your local community. First, you'll want to arm yourself with multiple shots of the best-selling paperback on Amazon called The Nephilim Looked Like Clowns. With this PPE, you're fully equipped and well protected to handle what's to come next. Second, have a pumpkin spice latte and white girl autumn your time away in knitted cream shackets and pilgrim hats, because soon enough, Samhain begins. This is when the veil between the spirit realm and the physical world is at its thinnest, and possession, the main symptom of Halloween, is more commonly presented, causing this type of unironic cringe to start happening. Just look at him. This poor soul thinks he looks cool. And if you're not careful, this could be you. Together we can stop the spread of Halloween and flatten the curve. When you see fully grown adults playing dress-up and mirroring unspeakable horrors from beyond the void, remember your training and cure their vapid sense of self-identity by handing them one of our favourably reviewed treatments. Your country must develop herd immunity to seasonal cringe. So, spread the cure far and wide. Just like the cure, this disease does not discriminate by age. Emulating the infected, you will see children running around in bedsheets, knocking on doors, begging for sugary treats, and threatening to damage your well-earned property. Make sure to fill their novelty buckets with the one thing all children secretly want: a well-rounded and relatable education in biblical history. That'll stop the spread. The Nephilim Look Like Clowns and the inevitable booster volumes are currently the only known cure to thinly veiled demon channeling holidays. This is your best defense against this pandemic of spooky proportions. All you have to do is trust the science. Which you know we did, because I'm showing you people wearing lab coats and looking serious. Get your copy on Amazon today and be prepared for tomorrow. Side effects of reading The Nephilim Look Like Clowns include, but are not limited to, a feeling of existential crisis, a well-rounded knowledge of a Christian contrarian view on human history, a foundational understanding of spiritual warfare, and a healthy aversion to clowns.
Hello everyone, how are we all doing? Come on in, sit on down. I have a special guest with me today. I have Mike from the YouTube channel Stellium7. Now, Mike's somebody who's been in the game for a long time. I remember seeing this guy's videos maybe 5-6 years ago, and I've always been dipping in and out of this particular subject matter throughout my years of research. And it's one of those topics I've wanted to talk about more, but I feel like, you know, I'm not an expert on this. Let's get the guys who are already, the boots on the ground people who are already out there finding the evidences for this one, because this is another one of those topics, and you know I love these type of topics, which are huge paradigm shifters and just change the way we look at the world. And if you don't know, I'm going to briefly summarize this, but the premise is that most of the things we see out there in the natural world in terms of mountains, rock formations, landscapes, even islands to some extent, or mesas, plateaus, mainly things dealing with rocks, are actually petrified forms of biological matter from an ancient time. And that's my very brief, basic summary. Mike, did I hit the nail on the head there, or am I way off?
Yeah, it was a beautiful, concise summary, actually.
Brilliant. Okay, so there you go. Thank you. I do try. So, yeah, there's my off the cuff random introduction. But I think you're pretty much a guy probably needs no introduction to most of my audience, as we were just discussing. I'm going to guess,
Hmm.
like I said, about 60% of people listening have probably already heard of your work. And one of our
Everybody.
one of our mutual moderators, Wendy, I believe, was the one telling me, Paul, you've got to get Mike on. You've got to talk with Mike, have a conversation with the guy. It'll be great. I was like, yeah, whatever, sure. And lo and behold, he started messaging me on Telegram, and here we are. So, Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself. Give the audience a brief introduction to what you do online, and then we'll just roll with it and let the conversation flow.
Okay, well, as far as myself goes, I work in Spain as a chiropractor. I've been in Spain for 13 years now doing that, and originally from California, and I've traveled and lived in a couple of other countries in Europe. I lived in Italy and then in Sweden for a decade. So I've been in Europe a long time
Hmm.
now, and but I came to all of this subject matter really about 10 years ago. Um, I don't know if you could hear that. Every once in a while, really loud mopeds go by, so I apologize for the sound if it comes through. But
Okay.
yeah, so I well, just to back up a little bit, I encountered your work through Topher Gardner recently, and I was really excited about it, especially hearing you did two or three with him that were awesome, and there were so many overlaps, and both with my past before I ever came to the subject of Earth shape and what I've started calling biogeology or rapid petrification. Some people call it mud fossils because that's the biggest channel out there that's discussing these kinds of things.
Hmm.
Uh, and So I had already kind of gone through a major awakening on the subject of psychedelics before this happened. So as I dug into a lot of things surrounding psychedelia, we could go into that more in detail if you like, but
Sure.
just started to unravel different threads of the tapestry of my reality, not the substances themselves, but to discover that there was a lot of nefarious activity surrounding the promotion of psychedelics and who was behind the agendas. And so I came to those realizations on my own. I had a number of ayahuasca ceremonies that I attended and experimented a lot in my 20s. And then I went through a psychedelic renaissance after I graduated from college and I moved to Spain. I was trying to come to terms with how are we going to turn things around in this world, because it seems to be such a mess and heading in the wrong direction when you know a lot about what's going on behind the scenes. And so I had had some pretty profound realizations and experiences in my 20s that left a profound impact on me
Hmm.
and shaped a lot of who I am and how I perceive reality. But then parenthood and college and two different degrees going to chiropractic college, I got away from all that, and I was in Sweden where nobody I knew was doing any of that sort of stuff. So when I moved to Spain, uh, I started to look into those subjects more, and I was just voraciously consuming different podcasts and reading books on the subject and experimenting on my own, and like I said, attending different ceremonies. So I had a number of profound experiences that woke me up to the possibility that things might not be as they seem when it comes to psychedelia, and I was very surprised that there was no talk of that in among the top people that were promoting psychedelics as a medicine and as a way of expanding consciousness and reuniting with the Godhead and all of those kinds of things. So I found that suspicious and uh, started to look into it more and more and came across books like this one, Weird Scenes in the Canyon. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, by Dave McGowan.
I'm
And
not.
he's
No,
talking
no.
about he's talking about the music scene, um, and how much of the 60s and 70s psychedelic music scene was the people involved in that often had ties to intelligence agencies and military and that sort of thing in high numbers. And And then, it was always airy-fairy whenever you heard people talking about psychedelics. It was always all the great things that could happen and never all the bad things that could happen. And there were lots of stories of people going to the rainforest to find themselves, and young women, being sexually abused, and all kinds of stuff that was happening in much larger numbers than people might realize. And so as I dug into that more, I came across the work of Jan Irvin. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Gnostic Media, Logos Media. He changed the name to later
Yeah,
on.
that's not, you're going back in time there. He's one of the old
Yeah, he's been
school.
around for a long, long time, and
I remember, yeah.
he's done a number of series that I recommend. He did many videos with a man named Hans Utter, and then an 8-part series with Steve Outram called The Shadow History of the Burners. So that was tying in the psychedelic history with the latest cutting edge of that. And another series called Laying the Dead to Rest. And basically, the more you dig into it, the more you find it's a cesspool, and that a lot of the key players in the movement to spread psychedelics through society as a tool for health and wellness. They've got agendas, and they're
Mhm.
oftentimes on the payroll, and many have been exposed to be on the payroll through freedom of information requests and that sort of thing. So that was a big awakening for me, and it tied into music. It tied into the whole 60s counterculture, spirituality, a lot of the Eastern uh, gurus and meditation, all these things that were starting to become very popular then also seemed to tie back into secret societies. And it was a massive rabbit hole that touched a lot on my own childhood, because I grew up in a very alternative family. We were, my parents were both followers of Indian gurus and meditators, and I grew up vegetarian, had very different mindset from my peers in my hometown in California.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, the more I looked into it, the more I started to question a lot of things. And then I had my own experiences with ayahuasca, and that tied into I had some revelations that as I started to look into them more, I started bumping up against things like MK Ultra, and and I had been exposed to that in my 20s because of a book my father gave me, and called Behold the Pale Horse by William Cooper.
Hmm.
And that kind of opened my eyes very young to the power structures and how society is really run, and the different both open and secret societies that are interlocking and shaping our realm in the direction that it goes in. And so I woke to that in my 20s, and then I kind of left it behind with college and parenthood and everything. And then around 9/11, I was reading David Icke, and I just saw the writing on the wall from the very beginning with that. And so it wasn't like I needed a bunch of documentaries or people digging into the information. I could see, well, this has the fingerprints of manipulation all over it, and the official story doesn't make any sense. So um, and then as I was waking up to all that, and the whole foundations of my reality were starting to be really shaky, that was when my one of my best friends, Alex Michael, who's also known as Conspiracy Music Guru, hit me with the possibility that the Earth might not be what we thought it was. So I started to dig into cosmology very deeply, and that consumed me for really the next couple of years.
Yeah, he'll do that. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. And and that was before all the algorithms kicked in. So you didn't have all the BS straw manning that's going on now, where you go search for something, you can put in the right name and you won't even find it. You can spell it word for word. And the channels that are really doing good things and producing quality content and actually doing experiments and getting out there and looking at empirical reality, and looking at the science and looking at the evidence, and dismantling NASA in every way. That kind of stuff is very hard to find, unless you know what to look for and you know specific names, which your average person doesn't.
Hmm.
Unless, but in 2000, 16, 17, 18, before the algorithms kicked in, you got, if you started watching that stuff, you got fed other great stuff. And so it was a real heyday and a renaissance, I
It
think,
was
that was happening.
the golden age of conspiracy. I remember that well. Yeah, there was so much
Yeah.
going on during that time. So many like groups and factions were formed over that subject as well, and round table discussions of many channels coming together. And I remember it fondly
Yeah,
with like nostalgia. I really do.
totally.
We're in a different
Yeah.
age now, though. Like I said, it's I've been hit by the algorithm search engine trick as well. Like my own wife can search understanding conspiracy, and all she gets are videos explaining why conspiracy theorists are crazy and how can we understand the conspiracy theorist mindset. Nothing to do with my channel comes up, And for a long time, you typed in the Nephilim look like clowns, and it was just some kind of random documentary from some Indian woman in America, and then some other random things here and there. And you wouldn't, again, I just wouldn't come up. I think it's changed a little bit now. I think I may have played the algorithm enough to sneak in.
You get the most flack when you're over target, they say.
Something like
You
that.
know.
Yeah. But carry on.
My channel's been throttled by the algorithms. I mean, I shot up to almost 20,000 within the first couple of years, and then I put out, I don't know, 100 or 200 videos since then. And I mean, if I compare the early numbers with what happens now, and in fact, I shared with you last night, after you posted your video, a lot of your subscribers went to my channel, and I saw that there was a surge in views, and then I literally watched 500 of the views.
So this is the video you
roll
sent
back.
Me. Yeah. So this is the surge.
Yeah,
that
I was
to your
refreshing. I was refreshing that, and so those are views that in a 48-hour period. When I first went in there and I saw it, it was at 950. And then I looked at it again an hour later and it dropped down to 750. And you can see as I'm refreshing, every once in a while it'll go up by one. But in the course of that 2 minutes, I ended up losing like another 10 views.
If I move the video along.
And I could see you can't do it now because that's just a
744.
recording. But if you click on the 60 minutes, then you can actually go in and you can see what people are watching. And so everyone kind of went to the first unveiling of Titan, and then they started churning through a lot of the other videos after that.
Yeah.
And I could tell when I woke up in the morning, it was like 1,000 views or something. But they literally stole 500 to 1,000 views last night, and I don't get comments. I used to get like hundreds of comments sometimes on videos when I would produce one, and like I don't know if people are just kind of they're bored with the material, and I'm just saying the same stuff I've been saying for years, or or if those comments are not coming through. So if people are out there who've commented and like waiting for reply, probably because I didn't get it. So
it happened. No, it does.
Anyway.
It does happen. That does happen, and I can contest to that being the truth.
Yeah, it's disheartening because you don't get feedback, and then you don't, I don't want to just keep doing the same 3 videos over and over again in order to try and, get new subscribers. It's like I've done things, I've done it. I don't need to keep redoing it over and over again. I know repetition is good for people because it sits and they forget about stuff they've heard before. But it's just not how I work. I have so many different interests and I go in so many different directions. So when I do something, I tend to pour my heart and soul into it for a period of time, and then I move on to the next thing. So so anyway, yeah, that's it. I call them the all ghoul rhythms.
That's right. So you were explaining earlier, you went through this whole psychedelic phase in your life, which I can relate to massively. I came more from the new wave of psychedelic users in like the 2000 periods onwards, maybe late 2009 to like 2015, 14, just before I was born again, was my heavy use period of psychedelics, and it was going hard during that time. But I wasn't really inspired by the old 60s psychedelia culture and the counter. No, I'm way past that. I was born way after all of that. So for me, it was more of a there was those influencers out there who were saying check this out, it's cool, you should do this, you can see other dimensions, you can talk to beings, you can find enlightenment, you can activate your third eye, pineal stuff, sacred geometry, new age, fractal spiritualism was everywhere at the time. It was that time, after
Terence McKenna.
Oh yeah, all of his lectures
Yeah.
are suddenly online, ready to, and I've listened to everything that man has said, and I listened, and
I probably listened to hundreds of hours of just him alone, and then thousands of other people.
Oh yeah, all of them. That's what I mean. And that, and I never said I was really like, I didn't buy it. It was more. I was more like, okay, so let me see this for myself and see what's really going on here. That was kind of more was my attitude. I've never been a hippie type. I've never been that loosey goosey orgone energy type person or chakra alignment. So I'm not really into that. I have little patience for that kind of thinking. So when I went into psychedelics, I wasn't doing it because I was like, I'm going to activate my third eye and expand my consciousness and speak to spirit guides or something. It was
raise your kundalini.
Yeah, it was nothing like that. It was more like, I need to see exactly what's really going on here so I can logically try and process this information and see what the real deal is. And what I got to the conclusion was, it just shows you more of what's actually there. It doesn't show you things that aren't there necessarily. It just opens up your perceptions and allows more information.
Did you encounter entities?
I didn't actually until after I stopped using. Only after I stopped using did I start getting what people would traditionally call in my culture a demonically attacked. And I had a vision.
But were these flashbacks or?
Oh yeah, with DMT flashbacks was the best way to describe them. One of the most prominent.
And those had entities, but before that, you hadn't encountered.
Prior
any?
to that, I did not see any entities. I kept going to the DMT realm. I was there. I've seen the space.
Right.
And I knew, but nothing was communicating with me. Nothing was trying to reach out to me in my experiences. And I wouldn't say I was disappointed. But it's kind
Maybe
of
they're
like
afraid of redheads.
Well, it's like Joe Rogan promised me jesters. Where are the jesters? You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing.
We're the machine elves.
Yeah. Terence McKenna goes on and on and on about self-dribbling basketballs, and machine elves and clockwork elves and stuff. It's like, where's mine? But no, I wasn't really bothered. I was more blown away.
The transcendental object at the end of time.
Yeah. I was more blown away and thankful that I kind of didn't have to get distracted by those things. It gave me the ability to actually pay attention without being distracted to what I was actually looking at. And I deduced it's kind of like, this is always here all the time, wherever we're going on DMT. This is here with us right now. We just don't perceive it. Our perceptions are limited in a normal.
Yeah, it's a frequency range.
Yeah, in a normal
that
state,
you're able to tune into. Yeah.
So I felt like, okay, so it's not special. It's the Earth still. We're not going somewhere else. I realized, because I realized I'm both in the room and not in the room at the same time. It's an odd feeling. You can't really describe it unless you do it. I'm not encouraging people to do it because, again, you don't need to do the drugs to learn these things and understand these perspectives. But it taught me the basics that there's a God, there's a creator. This thing is far more complex than I normally perceive, and my role in it is more complicated than I ever understood. So it opened my mind to that extent. But then once I quit these things and get myself over to Christ and went down that route, I did have a DMT flashback. 2 years sober. But
was it a psychedelic experience?
I went back to
caused you to go in that direction?
No, it wasn't. It was actually a big. My story's everywhere, but it was a long process of looking for God that inevitably made me have to break down and ask him to reveal himself to me, and he did. And I can't prove that to anybody, but from my own experience, I know it's real through that. And the psychedelics certainly, I would say, you could say, primed me in a way to understand that all that I see is physical is not all that there is. I guess it kind of helped prove that to me more so. But I've always been one to know that anyway, I would say. So it's kind of, I think, what did Alan Watts say? He says, be wary of unearned wisdom. And I think that's kind of what psychedelics really is, isn't it? It's kind of it's a shortcut to learn things you could just learn through a lifetime of experience instead. And it's
like being dropped from a helicopter to the top of Everest. You get to take in the view, but you didn't get the walk.
Yeah. The journey was what really counted. So it's kind of, you got this wisdom and knowledge of this thing, but you don't know what to do with it. It's that because you haven't earned it.
You haven't integrated the learning.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of felt like, but I feel like I've learned more about spiritual matters after the fact through relationship with Christ and God than I've learned through psychedelics. But although the psychedelics were certainly pretty, I'll say that much,
Yeah.
But either way, this flashback did happen, and I was back in the DMT. I recognized it instantly. It's like, I know where this is. I've been here before. It's a very familiar feeling when you do a psychedelic trip again. It's kind of like it's you're there, and it's like, oh yeah, I remember what this was like again, because it's like a dream. It's hard to hold on to something like that, but once you're back in the realm, it's familiar. It's like, oh yeah, I know, I recognize this place, you know. But this time, yes, enormous jester in front of me, a giant fractal black and white pattern, wide, grinning, bulging-eyed, spider leg head-shaped monster in front of me, you know, looking down at me, and it's quite literally a giant. And then I'm back in the real world again, and that vision ends, and it's kind of, I didn't know what to do with that until, you know, here I am like a decade later, and I've now wrote a book thanks to that vision. It's kind of,
and he was malevolent.
oh yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
hands down, this thing was looking at
Is
me.
this the Hat Man that I think I heard you talking about with Topher?
Oh, this was just a jester. This was a DMT jester.
Oh, just a jester.
This is what I've equated to the disembodied spirits of Nephilim giants. But the Hatman experience was actually a sleep paralysis dream. Again, after the fact. And yeah, I have a video where I've depicted the whole thing with images and drawings and stuff from start to finish, the whole dream, and that was a terrifying encounter too. Yeah, so the thing, I didn't really have these experiences with entities until I left that life behind and stopped doing the drugs. So you have to think in hindsight to try and make sense of this, and all I can think was when I was doing the drugs, it was better for them not to reveal themselves to me then, in order to, so I would continue perhaps doing it in their mind or something like that. But once I left the drugs behind, they weren't very happy with me for that, because they wanted me doing the drugs because it helped give them more of a channeling gateway into our world. Right. So once I stopped being useful, they came to kill me. That's what I kind of have equated it to now. You know, and I did have terrifying near-death experiences where my brain was quite literally shutting down. Like I don't know if I was having a stroke or what was happening, but I was going blind. I went numb. I went paralyzed. Hit the floor, and the mandala effect crystalline portal was opening up in my vision suddenly from the room, and I was being pulled into it. You know, and I had to literally say, "Jesus, help me," to make it stop. And it stopped. I was back. And
did you have a Christian upbringing?
No.
You were never interested in the church or the Bible or anything. It just came to you to say that?
No, by this point, I'd given myself over to Christ, but I was a baby Christian and didn't really know what to do. You know what I mean? I didn't know how to behave as a Christian. I've never been a part of a church. I wasn't raised in a church necessarily. My conspiracy research up until this point had shown me evidences that a lot of the truth indicates something to do with biblical history. So, this was maybe like late 2014 when I had that experience, and by that point, you know, I was a baby Christian. So I think it was more of the demons were coming at me hard, I assume, because they thought, let's get him before he realizes what he can do. Let's get him now. Do you know what I mean? And obviously, when I did say, Jesus help me, because it's just all my research had told me, just say it. This is what you need to do. You know, just call for help and he'll help, and I did, and it worked. So for me, that's pretty much a faith solidifier for me. I can't deny that. I can't deny that myself. I can't prove to anybody that happened or convince anybody else to have faith because of that experience. But for me, that's pretty cut and dry. You know, and
part of my awakening when it came to, you know, what I consider to be like the truth of psychedelia. Well, first of all, I mean, psychedelic itself, the word we're throwing around means mind manifesting, but there's many words that have been used. It used to be called psychomimetics because they said that it mimicked psychopathy, basically, caused schizophrenia in people. The telepathine, it was referred to because of the telepathic abilities that some people experience when they're on it. It's been referred to as entheogens, which means, you know, awakening the God within, or you know, or gods. And but they're always talking about this, you know, mind manifesting, is that this is something that's going on inside of you, and you just have to let go and go with the experience. And they're never talking about the possibility that there might be actual real entities that are inhabiting people, you know, or that there's something like, this is another book I came across, and you never hear about this. This is called In Darkness and Secrecy. the anthropology of occult sorcery and witchcraft in the Amazon.
Hmm.
Right? It's like that's a heavy duty, it's a heavy duty topic. And there's a lot of darkness out there. And probably for every good shaman, there's multiple, charlatans or people with agendas that and those agendas might not be their own agendas. They might be the agendas of entities that are coming through them as they're partaking in these substances. So
Yeah, well, it's no
it
secret to
was
anywhere else in the world that I mean, like I said, the shamans know what they're doing. They know what they're communicating with. They know these
right.
entities aren't a manifestation of themselves or the collective consciousness archetype symbol of mankind's shadow. They don't believe any of that Jungian crap. They're like,
Right.
no,
Yeah.
these are ancestor spirits. These are ancient primordial beings we're communicating with, separate from ourselves, and we're using it to gain information, knowledge, and power from them. It's kind of they're
Yeah.
not saying like, oh, I'm getting in touch with my inner self. They're not thinking like these naive Western and
No,
New
of course.
Agers
It's
see it,
just that's how it's packaged to the Westerners. And
Exactly,
then
yeah.
you have to look into who's doing the packaging and why. And if you go, you can go all the way back to the 40s and you'll find out that when the magic mushroom was first introduced to the consciousness of Americans, like already there, you've got the CIA involvement in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 60s, these books that I mentioned, I can highly recommend Mark Devlin and the Sage of Quay are people that have gone deep into these subjects of how, psychedelia ties into the music, ties into the Hollywood, ties, it's all a tapestry of similar themes and conclusions about what psychedelics are and the effect that they have on us. So that was what I when I started to wake up to that, I didn't have any like I had experiences with Santo Daime taking ayahuasca where I could feel entities in the room and I could feel energies moving around the room. And I wasn't in some kind of a bad trip myself. I was in an incredibly positive space at the time, and I was witnessing things happening to other people. And it wasn't paranoia. I was totally fine within myself. I was objectively experiencing and witnessing these things happening to others. And that was when I started to go, wait a minute, what's going on here? And realized that the people that were running the ceremonies were actually, whether it was harvesting loosh or spiritual manipulation. I did not know exactly what was going on, but I knew it wasn't good. And
Mm-hmm.
that was when I I I started to wake up to this whole subject and went deep into it. And the more I found, the more I realized, wait a minute, all the things that I thought I knew about the subject are coming from potentially tainted sources. And
Mm-hmm.
so I backed away from it and I'm like, until I know the truth about it, I'm not gonna do psychedelics again. And here I am 10 years later. And, and that kind of brings us, full circle to the original subject, which is when I got into earth shape and cosmology and these kinds of things and started to dig into that stuff after. Um, Everything was psychedelic at that point. Like the world got really weird really quick,
Oh yeah.
and it becomes this question of, well, every rock you pick up has creepy crawlies under it, and what is reality really, and how do I determine what that is? And is it just subjective? And it's like, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, or is there some kind of a concrete fundamental reality that we're all participating in? And then obviously there's like the matrix overlay of media and belief structures and all these things that influence us as individuals and as societies. But ultimately, you know, I I operated under I always believed in a creator. I always believed that there was a God and that that all of this beauty that we can experience in this place came, from somewhere. And it wasn't just an accident. And I never bought into the whole atomism and it's all just random molecules bouncing around. And as Rob Skiba would say, from goo to you by way of the zoo, so that ties in the whole evolutionary thing. And so that was before I dug into things like, evolution and found out that there's, that's also standing on flimsy ground. So I think that when people get into simulation theory, a lot of people get triggered with simulation as a topic because they believe that we're in a created realm and they think that that's just a psyop to try and get people to believe otherwise. my take on it, and this comes from like Eastern views on philosophy, is that ultimately this is all a creation in the mind of God, whichever God you believe in, right? It's all been created from the Godhead. And so in a sense, it's a simulation if it's a God, an idea inside of God. So I never had a problem with the simulation theory. I don't believe that it's super advanced aliens from light years away that have created computers and we're inhabiting them. Um, but it could be the case. I don't know,
Well,
you know.
that's when
Um,
you get that start getting
yeah,
that far out with your ideas. I mean, I've
yeah.
never had an issue with the language of simulation either, because my argument has
Mm,
always been, well, if it is a simulation, it's still God's creation.
mm.
It's still the creation. You can call it a simulation if you want, but yeah, it's kind of similar to what you're going at.
That's yeah,
You know,
that was my take. So
yeah.
I didn't understand the pushback from so many people on that, but it was actually a lot of flat earthers that were getting triggered by the whole simulation theory because they're like, no, it's a creator, a created realm and everything. But my starting point as I looked into Earth shape and I started to contemplate our reality was that there's, you know, I have to operate under the assumption that when I'm walking on the ground, that's real. And when I see a tree, that's real. And flowers and animals, and these are all real things. And they're all very complex and amazing. And we can hardly even fathom how it all fits together. Um, but to me, that was a good starting point. So after looking deeply into cosmology, I came across, the big tree idea, and saw 8 years ago no forests on flat Earth, and the whole tree stump
Hmm.
idea that these plateaus that we see around the world were once titanic trees.
Oh yeah,
Um,
a game changer. That video
yeah,
that changed my perspective overnight when I watched that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because it's kind of like, wow, it seems kind of self-evident that is the case. But
Hmm.
then you get all these counter arguments and, how would this petrify to that? And so I thought it was fascinating and it was just there as a data point. I try and just not get so hung up on things that I don't believe and just see where are the overlaps, where does everything, fit together and dovetail nicely, and, a syncretic approach to understanding reality. But I wasn't so attached to the big tree thing that I wanted to dig into it deeply. Um, and it really started with, Mud Fossil University. I'm sure there's loads of people that are familiar with that channel. And him talking about the idea that things could petrify far quicker than we were told, which was an idea that I never thought of it. Like, oh wow, so maybe things don't take hundreds of millions of years. I mean, that's the official narrative when it comes to petrified trees. We know that biology can petrify because petrified trees exist, but what we don't find are petrified soft tissue because that's all eaten away by the bacteria and the larvae. So, but petrified trees are there. So we know that biology can become stone. But the question is, are the timelines accurate? And is the way in which it occurs actually or the way in which they tell us it occurs actually the way it happens? So Roger's ideas were interesting to me, and I thought he was a little way out there. He's talking about 1,000-mile long dragons in the Sahara attacking giant fish, and he's coming at it from a heliocentric uh, cosmology, and he's a NASA space believer, and so much of his worldview and the world according to Roger is based on what I think is total hoaxery that has no basis in science whatsoever. Um, I'm referring to NASA and the supposed evidence for our spinning ball.
Hmm.
Um, doesn't mean I think it's flat. I don't know what it is. I think probably we're inside of some kind of a toroidal structure, or maybe it's even beyond our comprehension. But um, I thought, I'm a selective sifter, so I take the things that I think are interesting and move on. And one of the things that I thought was interesting was what he was saying about the idea of permineralization, which is that when something is buried in mud, the minerals and the the different substances inside the mud, they slowly work their way in. And because it's an anaerobic environment that doesn't have any bacteria or larvae, that flesh is not eaten up like it would normally do if it was, on the ground somewhere and eaten by carrion and that sort of thing. Um, so I thought, oh, that's an interesting concept. And then I started asking him questions and, like, well, how long does it take? And at one point he responded that he had petrified a chicken breast in 6 months by putting it in mud. And I think he had a little salt water and a little bit of electrical current. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but he was waving his 3 DNA reports for a giant that was in his backyard that he excavated, and I thought that was fascinating. And he was offering those on his website, and I looked through them, and they appeared. I didn't have the technical expertise to go into the chemistry and to understand if it was real, what was being analyzed. And the lab could be a fraud, the tests could be faked. There's a lot of things that could go wrong with that, but I thought, okay, at least he's doing the right stuff. He's following the scientific method. I studied chiropractic, so I went one, first year courses are like scientific method and how to conduct proper research and what are logical fallacies and all these kinds of things. So I was like, okay, well, but when he started to go in on the dragon, he's zooming in detail. I was like, it sure as heck looks like anatomy. It's like it doesn't look like some random flow of, or layers of stuff, that have been laid down. And there's a lot of detail there, but and he was talking about writings from one of the ancient Greek authors about a battle between the Leviathan and the Behemoth, and that actually occurred in that portion of the Sahara Desert. So people he was banning flat earthers left and right. Oh, they've ruined my life's work. They've it's like he was constantly complaining about the flat earthers, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to go there with that subject with him. But people were asking, well, if we're on a 24,901 mile circumference spinning ball, how does a 1,000 mile long dragon breathe if it's, flying or even walking? Its head would be far above our atmosphere, and the fish is lying on its side. How does a fish that size, when it's, turned upright, there's no ocean deep enough for them to see, so there were a lot of really good questions that people were asking that he never seemed to answer. And so I was skeptical of a lot of his findings from early on, but I like the mud fossil idea. And then watching him go through that dragon, that was when the penny dropped for me, because in this town that I live in Spain, there's a mountain that looks very much like an elephant from multiple angles. And I'm like, no way. Well, like what? And I love the subject of the Titans. I was like, as a teen, I loved the Clash of the Titans movie and Greek mythology, discussing them and everything. So it was an idea that I thought, well, it's fun, but I didn't want to lose myself in just going deep into the woo. Um, so I got on Google Earth and I started looking at it in detail. And I found, like, in an hour or two, I found 10 different anatomical features that matched up with at least vertebrate anatomy. It may not be an elephant, but it sure looks like one. And it's got the head shape correct, and it slopes down to a plateau that looks like trunk and the front limbs. There's a cave right where the eye socket should be.
Could you
There's
could you
a
show us?
there's
Could you show us this? Do you have any photos of this?
Yeah,
Yeah. Let's
sure.
get a
Let
visual
me
up.
see.
I,
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. I have seen this. I want you to show people who are watching. Like I do want.
All right.
I want them to see, because this is
So
pretty
let's see.
exciting stuff.
I will share my screen here. And wait a minute. Zoom. All right. So share screen, and screen number 2. And how do I share with audio? Because I might want to. There we go. You seeing that?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, this is from a presentation that I gave at Anarchapulco. Or no, this is the one I gave at Music and Sky in California back in June. And the subject was, let's see, here we go. gigantism, rapid petrification, and biogeology. Now, well, I didn't coin the term, I appropriated the term biogeology. It's a science term that has to do with the exchange between the lithosphere and the biosphere, the exchange of different materials and how they supposedly percolate up. And it's a very narrow, small aspect of science. And I thought, well, if there's any truth to the big trees or to the titans or to petrified organs, which I've focused on a lot on my channel, then major cornerstones of geology are just wrong. And I started finding a lot of things that didn't make any sense when it came to mud fossil theory, because I wasn't finding like entire bodies that were petrified. I was finding organs that were petrified and they were outside the body. And that, or at least what I believe to be organs, I'm not stating it as fact. I've got a lot of evidence in favor of that, but I could be wrong. Um, so I needed, and I also started to discover that there were lots of other ways that things could potentially petrify. Like, are people still seeing us? Because now I'm talking instead of showing
Yeah,
things,
people
but
can see what
they can
your screen now. So what you're sharing,
they can see. Okay, I
yeah,
was just wondering if they could see us, since I'm not really.
they
It's not very.
they can't see us. They just see what you're
Okay.
showing on the screen. Yeah.
All right. So the yeah, the reason for biogeology is quite simply that if any of this stuff is right, then major cornerstones are wrong. And there's a lot up for grabs when it comes to how things are dated and how accurate are carbon dating and all the other different methods of dating.
Mm.
And yeah, so where do I go from here? Um, just so the term biogeology is just meant as an umbrella term. So
Yeah.
mud fossils would fit into that as one component of how that occurs. And then there's things like plasma petrification, and then there's things like petrification through electricity, high heat, high mineral content waters. All of these things can lead to petrification. So
Hmm.
um, let's see. I'm just breeze through a bunch of the things that we've already talked about here. So this is one of the things that got me thinking about the big trees and how they might actually, there might be something to it. You've got these, many tabletop plateaus around the world
Yeah.
that look dramatically like tree. And, oftentimes you can see wood grain in them.
Hmm.
And then, movies like Avatar that seem to kind of hint at it in our, throw it in our face.
Yeah.
We've got where's that here? Is that yeah. So these sorts of things, there's all kinds of different ideas when it comes to cosmology.
Hmm.
And then you've got the most famous of them, which is Devil's Tower, that you know, they tell us is lava that has pushed upward and then
Hmm.
cooled, and it magically forms these hexagonal columns. And I'm not going to read off of that, but people can read that. This is, mainstream ideas about how that supposedly occurred. And
That's
so they're in disagreement.
basalt columns, if I remember correctly.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so when we look at lava, this is what we see.
Hmm.
Right. And there's no straight lines anywhere,
No.
ever. Right. So they're saying that because of rapid cooling and pressure, that suddenly this stuff becomes this stuff, which I find to be absurd.
Hmm.
And if you look, can you see my cursor also when I'm moving it around?
Um, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, anyway, the lower left
Oh,
there,
there
you
it
can
is. There it
see.
is. Yeah. Yeah.
You can. So you can see that there's these hexagonal shapes, but then look, there's a bigger hexagonal shape. This is how things grow. This is like, Roger likes to think that all these things are titan tendon, and I think it's far more likely that they're tree related.
Hmm.
I've done loads of videos covering evidence and looking at different theories surrounding how something like this could form.
If I remember
And you
correctly,
can
didn't
see that.
didn't the guy who made the No Forest on Flat Earth video, he thought it was the cross section of a flax plant, didn't he? The flax stem,
Yeah,
which also has the
yeah.
exact same pattern as what you see there on the Devil's Tower.
Right. I mean, if it was plant or tree, then we're talking about the antediluvian era,
Yeah.
right? We're talking about a time period that we don't know much about. So
Mm-hmm.
there could have been other kinds of you know, types of life that don't thrive now that had a
Yeah.
different look. So it doesn't, because usually when you do cross sections of trees, you don't see perfect hexagonal columns. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
so the flaxseed is one thing, but to think that these are all flax. So that begs the question, like if they were trees, who cut them down? I did a video on that, looking at this idea of the myths of Paul Bunyan. He's a lumberjack going around with his giant animal that could have been something like Montco, which is this mountain here in Spain that I spent 2 years examining and making videos about. Um, and then you get all of these kinds of things. I think a lot of this stuff is pareidolia. Tried to educate people a lot, not just jump off the deep end when it comes to these sorts of images, because you could take a look at these kinds of things and you could turn it the other way around and you might see an entirely different kind of face.
Mm-hmm.
Shadows might be involved, foliage. So pareidolia is an important thing to understand. Apophenia, which is the recognition of a false pattern, right? You think you're recognizing a pattern. That's what I've been accused of with the heartstones, which I'll show a bit of later. But this was one of the few Titan examples that I thought, well, that would be really interesting to get boots on the ground and get up close and get up into these eye sockets and see if there's any hint of actual anatomy inside the eye.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I did with Montgo, which I'll show pictures of in a moment. I was really looking at the scientific method, like thinking of interesting questions, formulating a hypothesis, making predictions. I got out my anatomy books. There's a cave right where the eye should be. So I thought, okay, well, why not just make a laundry list of things that I would expect to find if there was any truth to it, and then go up with that list and see if those things are there. And that's what I did. These are just examples of all the different problems that this community is rife with shoddy research. And now we have this to think about as well, which is all the AI manipulation and
Yeah.
stuff that people are presenting as real, and they're not even doing the most basic background research.
Mm-hmm.
So, these are the common pitfalls that I've been associated with in my channel. I talked about these cherry picking. Oh, you just pick out the stuff that fits your narrative. Dunning-Kruger effect is you learn a little bit about something, you think you know a ton, and oh, I know everything, and then you have this massive fall as you start to realize I don't know anything about the stuff I'm talking about. And then other examples. So yeah, so let me get to some of the pictures of Montgo. Comes later in this presentation. It was primarily, so this is the mountain here. And this is what I believe is an eye socket. And from the other side, you can't really make it out here, but I'll show you other photos in a moment. There's actually a quarter moon cut out where an ear would be. And it's a different color than the rest of the mountain. And there happens to be a cave right in the center of that. Which I didn't know about until I'd already been looking into the mountain. So this is looking from above, and this would be the head, the spine. Can make out a rib cage. There's cutouts on both sides where the head would meet the shoulders, and there's even a deep canyon between what would be legs. And this is actually on Google Earth, and here you can see evidence of a bit of manipulation. I did 4 videos on the subject, and I was doing a number of interviews and showing people what I had found. And the first video is just an overview. That's what most of your listeners watched yesterday. And that was the first video I ever made. It's probably got the most views of any video on my channel because it's the start of the series. It's a video I would do completely different if I were to do it today because there's so much that I've learned that things I wouldn't have said, pictures I wouldn't have shown. So it's kind of a shame because a lot of people start there. You can really start at the second video and work your way forward. Second video is all about the evidence surrounding the eye. Third
Mm.
video is all about the evidence surrounding the ear. The fourth video is where I go into the actual structure of the mountain itself and the components of the limestone and all the iron ore and all of the quartz that's all around and how that looks and how that matches up with histology, which is histology is just the study of tissue. So if I cut a bit of tissue and I look under a microscope and I examine it, I'm doing histology.
Hmm.
So I um, I did that. I went in with 1000x microscope and looked at the limestone. Limestone, we're told, is made of bone, which is very interesting. In
Mm.
the mainstream geological narrative, limestone is a combination of coral, mollusk, shellfish, and um, uh, skeleton, exo and endoskeleton.
I didn't
And
know
all of
that.
those
I didn't
and
know
all
that.
of
Yeah.
those are said to have been compressed under the sea floor and then under the sedimentary layering as all of the foliage and the plant and the animal life dies, it settles to the bottom and then it compresses slowly, and that's what gives rise to our sedimentary layering. And as that compression gets greater, then what you have is metamorphic rock, which is an even greater pressure to the point where things have started to melt and swirl into each other. So a lot of these stones that we see around the world, that when you look at them, it looks like carved meat. You see the
Mm.
fatty swirls and all these things. We're told that that's because of the immense pressure and heat, and that's where that comes from. There's never any talk of the possibility that maybe there was gigantic creatures, and what we're actually seeing is a bit of one creature's flesh, not a whole bunch of creatures that have been compressed together.
Mm.
So um, limestone is said to be made of calcium carbonate, which is which is all of these different skeletal remains compressed. Well, I was mocked when I started doing videos on the elephant on the channel because like one geologist is like, if you just go look at this with the naked eye, you can see the remains of these things in it. This is just a foolish idea. And I'd been walking around this mountain for 8 years, you know, 6 years or seven before I even got onto this subject, just hiking it because it's where I live. And I knew these rocks, and I always puzzled over how they could have possibly formed that way. And so when he said that, I was like, okay, I bought a 1000x microscope online, that was Wi-Fi that I could use with my phone, and I went out and I checked. This limestone shows zero hint anywhere of any of those things. There is limestone called coquina that Coral Castle was built out of. I don't know if you're familiar with that in
Oh yeah.
Florida. This guy that supposedly levitated these multi-ton blocks by himself, and built this massive structure.
Yeah.
That's made from coquina, which you can see with the naked eye. The shells are in there and the skeletal remains and all these things. And so some limestone does form that way, but not all limestone. So anyway, I thought that was really fascinating when I discovered that this mountain that I was claiming was bone, because we have two different kinds of bone. We have compact bone. Oh, you can't see me. I'm like gesticulating, right? uh, we have compact bone and we have trabecular bone. So the outer portions of our long bones are made of this thick, hard bone, and then the inner portion is where our blood is made, and that looks like Swiss cheese, and it's fractal, and it just keeps breaking down into smaller and smaller fractal Swiss cheese-like bits, and that's where our red blood is formed, and that's where blood plasma, our stem cells are there. And I started looking at these rocks on the mountain, and I'll show you some later. But it was mind blowing because it was matching up perfectly with bone anatomy. And then I found out with the microscope that there was no hint of any of the things they said should be there. So that was an interesting thing. But so then, I'm like, okay, well, I need to start to really check this stuff. And if you see the cursor here, the bottom one with all these colors, eye sockets of vertebrates in general are made of 7 different bones. So the form of the skull takes very different shapes, but the bones are the same and they all meet in similar places. So if you know that anatomy, then you could go into something like, say, an elephant skull, which is what we're looking at here, and you would see that there's lines coming down. These lines are called sutures. And so this is the eye socket. A lot of people think that that might be it, but this is the temporal bone, which is, I mean, the temporal fossa, which is where the one of the two main chewing muscles are. It's shaped like a fan. It's on
Mm.
the sides of our heads. And so, and then over here, this was one of the things that I saw on Google Earth initially that just my jaw dropped when I saw it, is that this is called the infraorbital foramen. And in humans, it's right here below the eye socket. But in elephants, it's in front. And so you can see here. And the mountain looks like it's lying on its stomach with its head tilted back. And which would put that in a, you know, a very interesting place, because right there where this hole would be in the mountain, you can see here, this is Google Earth, this isn't an actual photograph. But this is showing very clearly that there's actually a cave that's going perpendicular to this one.
Mm.
And this is a picture of it here looking through, and it has a very organic look and feel to it. So right off the bat, I started finding these like highly specific things that were matching with the anatomy in ways that they shouldn't. Like, for example, between this bone and this bone, there's a suture that goes back where the yellow meets the orange. And that goes back into the eye socket, you know, over this red and blue here.
Hmm.
And that looks like this, right? Well, in the cave, let's see if I can find it quickly here. In the cave, where is it? You've got this overlap. This isn't a crack in the inside of the cave. This is an overlap of two different rocky structures that are meeting,
Mm.
and that's exactly there in the cave. And then there's an optic fissure here. This is where the optic nerve goes into the back of the skull and connects to the brain. And right in that same location, there's this in the cave. Like, what are the odds, you know? And then there's this rocky structure here, which looks like the remains of an eyeball, and it's like this cresting wave that sticks up. And there's all kinds of massive boulders just below that structure, which I've shown in videos on my channel. And there's no possible way that they could have come from above, because this is smooth and unbroken, and the overhang would make it impossible for any rock from the top of the mountain to land there. So there's like these random gigantic rocks just below this structure that make no sense whatsoever. So the more I dug, the more Twilight Zoney it got. And you know, I found that this is very interesting here. This is just me looking at, you know, 3D rendering of these different skulls. So I wasn't taking it lightly. I was like, if I start making videos about this, people are going to think I'm a nutcase. And so I went about it as methodically as I possibly could, and you know, just to show how these bones fit together. Well, right here, I don't know how to pause it. Let me see if I can do that. Right. Okay. No, it didn't pause. It's got a pause button. There we go. Okay, maybe I can. All right. So you can see it drops down in back. Now, obviously, this is a human skull. I couldn't find the equivalent in an elephant, but this is where the optic fissure is, and this is this channel that goes down. Well, the interesting thing is right back here in the cave is a channel going down at a 45-degree angle that goes the whole length of the inside of the cave.
Mm.
And then I discovered later, a friend told me after I'd already been up there, that there's a narrow channel that you can shimmy down. And if you go down this like 4-meter channel, behind that is a cavern. So there's a cave within a cave, and that cavern is exactly where it should be for the sinuses, which you can, or sorry, not the sinuses, but the oh yeah, the sinuses, because you've got the tear ducts and then you have the sinuses that are behind the maxilla, which is this bone. Just gesturing again. Sorry, nobody can see me, but anyway. So so that was, it was already pretty weird. And then I started to hypothesize that there might be an ear canal because that side of the mountain was so well preserved. And you can see this discoloration here. And right where that arrow is pointing, there's actually a cave that goes in. And I didn't know it at the time when I started looking into this. But when I started to try and find a way up here to see if I could get to this little trail right here, I was looking at the road names and I found there's a canyon name, and then the canyon, it's called Barranc del Migdia, which is named after the Barranca of midday. And then on the web search that I did, sorry, on the web search that I did, uh, there was a link to Cova del Migdia, which is Cova is the Valenciano word, the local dialect for cave. So I was like, wait a minute, there's a cave there, and I didn't know anything about it. So this is just a little 30-second. Where's that? Let me see. Yeah, just take a look at this. A whole team of archaeologists had gone in and excavated this cave that I knew nothing about. They did 3D mapping. They went in with 3D photography. That looks a lot like a cochlea to me, which is this spiral organ in the inner ear. They found bodies. They found cave paintings. And this is literally a 3D fly-through. If you've got the red and blue glasses, you can see it in 3D. And then there's cave paintings with animals, and that looks like a four-legged creature with horns, and then deluge. This is like creatures falling from the sky. This is just looking at all the limestone, and the whole mountain is just there's a part of the mountain that's collapsed where the left ear and the left eye would be. That whole area has collapsed downward, and all of this is just a big fragmented mess of this, what I believe is trabecular bone, which has it's the limestone with the iron ore and quartz. And in my theories related to biogeology, I believe that anything that was originally fat petrifies to quartz. So if you look at this here, this is an eyeball. You can see this whole back side of this is really thick and fatty, and that's the optic nerve. So if the eyeball were to, say, blow out as a result of some massive plasma apocalypse or very, very high temperatures, like from, a pyroclastic flow from a volcano is said in mainstream geology to be capable of reaching temperatures of 1,500 degrees Celsius and move at the speed of sound. That's a lot of heat and a lot of speed. And if anyone's ever been in a sauna and blown on their arm, you can almost burn yourself if it's really hot sauna, because the speed of the air increases the experience of the heat. And then pressure cookers, if something is under pressure, it will cook things far faster. So this rocky structure here that I was saying looked like the remains of an eyeball. The entire backside of that is covered in a 10-inch thick layer of quartz. You can see what it looks like here.
Mm.
And that is exactly what I would expect of the sclera, which is the white portion of the eye, and this back fatty section. So I believe that all things that are fat, like ligament, tendon, disc, eye, and even blood plasma, and the entire nervous system, all of these things are made of fat, which I believe petrified to quartz. And as I started to dig into all of this, after I made the fourth video, really going into detail about the structure of the stone all over the mountain, I was in an interview and discovered that the mountain had been manipulated on Google Earth. I had gone in hundreds of times, and all of this was clear as could be. And suddenly it was manipulated in a way that you could no longer get away from the mountain and see the big whole picture of the mountain without the eye being closed up.
Oh, wow.
And if you zoom in close and wait for a moment, the eye opens up. And the same thing with the ear. So to me, that was a pretty clear-cut case of censorship on the part of Google.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see here, this is before footage when I made the first 3 videos, and I'm zooming in on the ear. And this
Yeah.
is me using Google Earth as a drone because you're not allowed to fly drones because it's a national park. And then you can see down here how it looked afterwards.
Oh yeah.
So what are the odds, right? This is the thing. If you're gonna, I can just stop sharing for a moment here and come back to it.
Well, the odds are astronomical that they would just.
Yeah, that was the thing. I like games of chance. I played a lot of backgammon growing up as a kid, and like throwing the dice and what are my odds of rolling doubles 3 times in a row? Not good, right?
Well, it has to be a
You know?
reaction to what you did. There's no other logical explanation why they would suddenly mask eye holes and ear holes and fill in parts of the side of a mountain on Google. Who has the time for that? You don't just do that for no reason. Like it has to be a reaction, and the clear.
Well, if they
Yeah.
didn't, it's a hell of a coincidence. And what are the odds that a computer glitch would just happen to like block these things that I had been studying in detail and sharing,
Yeah,
information
I don't
about?
believe in coincidences.
Uh,
That's just ridiculous.
I had a lot of people tell me like I was on the fence with your research until now, like now I'm convinced because they saw that and they're like, there's just no way. And
Hmm.
you know, going back to like reality in the Twilight Zone, I once had somebody um, post one of my favorite comments ever. They said, your videos are more powerful than psychedelics because they don't wear out. They don't wear off, like it's like once you've seen things through these eyes and you've seen the mountains of evidence for the trees. Like I meant to say that before when we were looking at the stumps, is they're compelling, and there's a lot of them that look to the T like tree trunks. And then that begs the question, how did they get cut down and why are they flat on top, that kind of thing. But that's not even close to the best evidence out there for the big trees. I always refer to my friend Hangman 1128's channel. He's also named Mike. I got the chance in June, the beginning of July, to travel with him in Colorado and to the Black Hills of South Dakota and go to the absolute best sites in the world for the remains. And this guy's been studying this as long or maybe a bit longer than I've been looking into all of these things. And he's focused entirely on the biblical trees. He's a
Hmm.
Christian and believes that, when you look at Ezekiel 31, he believes that you should read that over and over and over and over again and understand that it's meant literally, not metaphorically. And if you understand that, then you realize that the avatar trees were a real thing, and the stumps, you know, could be evidence of that. But the stuff that he's showing, when I saw it, I literally shed tears because it was so incredibly compelling. I've done many, many videos on the channel and live streams covering all of the different data points. There are literally hundreds of different data points that line up with this. It's not just, look at the mountain that looks like a tree. It's not point and claim. There's so much more to it.
Hmm.
And
Well,
so
you were releasing some videos where you literally boots on the ground, going climbing mountain tops yourself with your friends, and you were showing,
yeah,
weren't you, like just this giant rock formation in front of you, and then you're holding up just in the foreground a tiny piece of wood,
yeah,
and you were like,
that's
and it's identical. It's
yeah.
identical
Let me
to
let me
rotting wood and bark
Yep.
to this rock in front of you, and it's kind of like the land is littered with these things, and
Yeah.
the scale, like the absolute mind-boggling scale that of the original tree must have been for this to be the case.
Yep.
We cannot comprehend such sizes. It's like, when you think of like, I don't know, like three I don't know, 50 million people, you just can't imagine that kind of thing. It's an abstract number by that point. You know what I mean? This is what we're
Yeah.
talking about with these trees. It's kind of like these sizes are far beyond our comprehension of just how large things were at some point. I mean, the implications alone of an elephant being that large as well. I
Yeah.
mean, how big were the
I'll
people? How?
I'll share my screen again here. So,
Sure.
if you look at this is looking at wood, right?
Hmm.
And the way wood breaks down is very, very interesting because it the kinds of structures that like this is a real good example of how cedar breaks down. and it fractures vertically. So you've got all the or you've got all the vertical lines that trees grow in, and then you have all of these horizontal fractures. Well, take a look at this. This is identical in every way to that,
Hmm.
but on a scale that it boggles the mind. And there you can see pieces of the oxidized portion have been removed, and you can see it's still got the color and the grain underneath it.
There it is.
Yeah. And so quartz seams are the petrified sap. And people can argue all they want, but I've challenged many of the critics of this theory to present me with any kind of an idea that makes sense when it comes to how these structures could have formed based on the mainstream geological narrative. And nobody's ever been able to come back with a good explanation. Like this section here, he's gone to some of those and he's broken them off, and you can see that it's still fibrous inside. Look, I mean, to me, this is self-evident, ironclad evidence that the great trees, look at that beautiful piece there. I mean,
Mm.
people can go back and pause these images and see them in detail.
Or
But,
go to your channel and watch these
or go
videos
to,
after
yeah.
this. Yeah.
The mainstream narrative tells us that petrified forests existed all over the place. There's a channel called The Archivist, Ben. It's also known as Waking Up with Analog. And he's done amazing research looking at the newspaper articles from the 1880s to the 1920s. And they were mining these petrified forests. Like we can go to small little sections that still exist today and pay to go look at them and go, oh, look at the petrified trees. But they won't tell us that these trees were found all over the country and that they were mining them because they were filled with gold and silver and copper and all kinds of precious gems and minerals. And this is like in newspaper articles where they're assaying $15,000 of silver, and this is 100 years ago. So what would that be in today's money? To the ton, right? So they're just like taking these chunks of trees and crushing them up and getting whatever they wanted out of them. I mean, it's wild, the evidence that is in favor of this, and things that they don't teach us about, like opal comes from tree. This is all this is all petrified wood,
Mm.
right? And so they go into opal mines and they're trying to find these little chunks of this really, beautiful material. But when you look at everything around them, it also looks like wood.
Hmm.
It's just like, what are the odds? It's just one thing after another that lines up. Here's like a petrified material with copper going through it.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Oh gosh, the majesty of
Mm.
nature. I get into biogeology. I start to ask the question, like, what are geodes really?
It's funny. Just have to
Uh,
stop you there. Most people think right, the study of geology and rocks is like the most boring thing ever. like,
I
and,
did.
and in fact, that's a
Archaeology and geology were like the two most boring things I could imagine studying when I was a
yeah.
teen. I was like, who wants to go look at a bunch of old buildings and like sit there with a brush? Like, I think they make it as boring and unappealing as possible so that
Oh
people don't
yeah.
wake up to these simple truths.
If
Like,
you want to go into
they,
programming though, even on like something like the Big Bang Theory, which is programming through and through, the geologist
yeah,
in there, Bert, is like an incredibly slow talking, monotone, boring, useless. Like
right.
he's a point of mockery for the rest of them. How just useless his field of study is. You know what I mean?
Which
But
which gets into the question people always ask, well, why the lie?
mm,
If you know that Titans were once a thing and you know what the anatomy looks like, you're going to know where to find the precious whatever you're looking for.
yeah.
If you know that geology is actually biology, petrified,
Hmm.
that's a huge advantage. If everyone else is just thinking, oh, it takes hundreds of millions of years and then tectonic plates bang together and then they go upward and they just all of those sedimentary layers are magically forming those incredible photos that I just showed from Hangman's work.
Hmm.
No way. That makes zero sense. When especially I've been there now in person and I got incredible footage. If people go to my channel and they look at just the last 10 or 15 videos. I did about 10 just like 2-minute videos just of the best sites. And if you want to tell me that that was formed through sedimentary layering, I'll tell you to have your head examined because it makes no sense whatsoever. You've got all of these concentric spheres, concentric rings that look exactly like knots of wood and tree grain, and you've got the quartz seam that's moving through the material that looks exactly like the sap of a tree.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just fatty things that petrify to quartz, it's also sap. And we're told that sap, petrified sap, is amber. But that's a joke, really, because if you look at quartz on the Mohs hardness scale, quartz is about a 7, diamond is a 10, ruby and amethyst, or ruby and emerald are 9s on the hardness scale,
Mm-hmm.
right? And amber is a 2.5. You can dent it with your finger. So is amber petrified sap or is amber oxidized, hardened sap? I think it's pretty obvious that's what it is. And you can find tree trunks today that have, been cut off and sap has seeped out and then it's been exposed to the sun and to the elements and oxidized by, whatever processes. And it looks exactly like you know, amber or quartz. So these are kidney and liver and gallstones, and in cross sections this is obviously a diagram. These are kidney stones, and I just posed the question like, well, what about geodes? What are geodes? Could geodes be petrified fruit? Could they be our bodies are making stones all the time. We've got kidney stones, gallstones. A single gallbladder can have hundreds of stones in it. Well, if something's already a stone, it doesn't need to petrify, right? So if the body is decayed and worn away, then all of that is going to be there still as a stone. And when you break these things open, this is kidney stone. This looks exactly like a geode.
Yeah.
And then, taking a look at concretions, like what forms concretions. It could be electrical activity, plasma, but it also could be, let's see, I think it's at the end here. There's the last, it's a last photo, unfortunately, but there's trees that have berries growing on the outside. What if they were gigantic trees and they went down and things petrified?
This is blowing my mind because I've
Yeah.
looked at those rock spheres throughout my research for years. They've always cropped up every now and then, and I've heard so many explanations for what those things are. Like, stars that fell from heaven is one of them, or something like this, and it's kind of this is one hell of a convincing explanation. They're just kind of I'm
a big fan of Occam's razor,
Yeah, it's
like,
simple, isn't
all
it?
things being equal, the simplest answer is probably the best.
Imagine if a giant like decayed on the surface of the earth and its gallbladder just split open and these giant spherical rocks just spilled out and landed somewhere innocuous. It's kind of, there you are, they're just there now. They look oddly placed. Where do these things come from? But now it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I just fascinating. Go ahead.
There's a few different versions of this going around that pyramids on top of what appear to be giant tree stumps. And then you've got, I think Hollywood was constantly giving us truth in plain sight.
Doc, it's gonna be a hell of a long walk back to Hill Valley from here.
Still the safest plan. After all, we can't risk sending you back into a populated area or to a spot that's geographically unknown. You don't want to crash into some tree that once existed in the past. You don't want to crash into some tree that once existed in the past.
Yeah. So was that a truth drop there, or was it just a coincidence?
Well.
So this is a single gallbladder. Look at all those stones. And these are literally petrified brains. And if you look inside where it's broken away here, it's like quartz. These are things I found after I already had these theories, and so I'm of the mind that any one of these things can all petrify. And then you've come across stuff like this, like, oh, well, it must be what is that, a transmission or a drivetrain? I don't know. I'm not a car guy, but oh, they must have been making cars 200 million years ago, right? There's examples of these things. This is a fish eating another fish. Jellyfish. How the heck a jellyfish is going to break down. These are literally preserved in great detail. So I think, when it comes to the mainstream narratives about why things petrify, I think most of it is bogus. And so paramineralization, that would be mud fossils. This is why I created the term biogeology. It wasn't to try and steal Roger's thunder or rip him off. It's because mud fossils does not cover the broad spectrum of different possible things that we know can lead to petrification. So paramineralization, I already explained, that's the leaching in of the stuff that's in the mud as the water and the gas works its way out. High mineral content waters. There's a cave, Mother Shipton's Cave. You're in the UK. Have you heard of that?
No, I'm not. No.
So people go there. She was a prophet, or not a prophet. What do you say? A seer, somebody who made like Nostradamus. What do they call those? Can't remember. You know what I mean? People who predict the future. And so this cave is named after her because she was a pretty interesting lady. And there's high mineral content waters, and there's ropes hanging, and people will go and tie objects to these ropes. And within like 6 months, it's already beginning to petrify because the mineral content is leaching its way into the material. Plasma is another very obvious one. If you look at we'll see it here in a second. We'll stick with the high mineral content water first. So these are animals that have fallen into this lake. It's called Lake Natron, and it's high in natron and or natrium, and these are, what is it? I always get it mixed up if they're highly base waters or highly acidic, but they basically cause things to die once they fall in. And the only thing that can survive here are flamingos with their long legs, and everything else dies once it falls in. So this is just a guy who fished some of these things out while they were still relatively soft and positioned them for photography. This is what happens when you take electrodes to wood.
Yeah.
These are plasma configurations that look a lot like the Grand Canyon.
Oh yeah.
These are called Lichtenberg figures when
right.
they're on the land, and they're found all over the world. And I believe that we're actually seeing the scarring of great electrical plasma events. So it's not just the Great Flood. There were other things that happened, and maybe it was in the antediluvian era, and it's stuff that's, well, this is, I would love this to be more of a dialogue instead of just me presenting, because I've got loads of interviews on my channel and presentations that I've done. I'd love to hear more from you about what you know about, say, the apocryphal texts, the Book of Jasher, the Book of Enoch, what we know about the antediluvian era and how that might tie into Titans and petrification. I mean, we've got the myths of Medusa and all of that sort of stuff. And before I pass over the mic on those questions, I just want to show people this. This is an experiment. I don't have the name of the channel off the top of my head, but I've got lots of stuff on my channel about rapid petrification. I reference his work and I have the links there. But this guy is mixing two different powdery substances together, and he's putting them inside of a crucible, which is basically just thick glass. And then he's putting a ceramic lid on top that can vibrate so that things can work their way out and in. And then he puts it into a microwave. And within 10 seconds, he's converted these two different powders into ruby. These are raw ruby that they fluoresce as they should under UV light. And these are not high quality ruby that he could make loads of money off of by, creating them in his microwave and selling them. But the fact is that these are 9 out of 10 on the hardness scale, and he's making them from powder in 10 seconds in a microwave. Microwaves have a magnetron, which is a very powerful component, and creates this plasma arcing effect. You can take two grapes and wet them and put them right next to each other, and you can see the plasma arc between grapes. So it's just, incredibly fascinating. And this is one of the largest volcanic electrical storms ever seen. And I just posed the question, what would happen if the entire ring of fire all were to erupt at the same time and spew, ungodly amounts of volcanic ash up into the sky, that ash is it's very conductive. So you could get plasma storms, the likes of which the world has never seen. But I think ultimately, it probably comes from outside of the realm. I think that things touch down. So this is just slides looking at supernatural petrification versus man-made petrification. Whoops. It just froze. Hello. There we go. Man-made instant petrification. You can petrify wood in 24 hours in a laboratory that's indistinguishable from regular petrified wood under a microscope.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just one more example of our narrative is not what we were taught. That's Mother Shipton's cave. These are bog bodies, which petrify in bogs in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a very interesting form of petrification. The bones dissolve and the muscles dissolve. The skin remains intact, and all of the organs are intact and harden.
Interesting.
So that ties into my theories about petrified organs, which is a big portion of the channel.
Mm-hmm.
And how long have we gone? You said you wanted to go for around 2 hours. How much time have we got left?
We've gone for an hour and a half so far.
Okay, so yeah, so this is the thing. It's not, this is the group. We're on the frontier, of trying to figure out what these things are. There's no textbooks on this stuff. There's no, I think Roger is off on a lot, if not most of his ideas. He's right about some things, and I'm appreciative that he turned me on to just the idea, because otherwise none of this would have ever happened as far as my research. But I think he's entirely too certain about every one of his claims. And I've got a video called, what is it? It's Petrified Coochies and Truther Discernment or something like that. It's one of my recent live streams. If you go to the live stream tab, I've never really, criticized him, but there's some things that he's shared in the last couple of years that are just like, I was shaking my head. He's sharing AI without doing any vetting whatsoever and making claims about it. And I think he's got a long way to go, is my opinion. So people may not like me saying that, but most of those people probably haven't checked out my channel or gone through and seen, he's also an armchair researcher. All of my stuff is boots on the ground. Like I've been up in the eye, I've been into the back of the cave, crawling through on my stomach to get to it. I haven't made it up to the ear because it's off limits. I've done a lot of spelunking. I've been in the Black Hills with Hangman. I've seen that stuff with my own eyes, and I've done a lot of work that has to do with petrified organs as well. And so let me just. I think that's
okay.
It's good for the screen sharing, at least for now.
Yeah, well, that was an amazing presentation, and I just let you roll with it for a little bit because obviously you were showing us one thing after another there, and I can tell.
I mean, this is literally like a 4-hour presentation.
Oh yeah, well, this is the thing.
Yeah.
You do have like 4-hour-long videos on your channel, like, plenty of them where you
multiple,
because these aren't things you can just explain quickly. They're really not.
No.
There's a lot of nuances and facets of information for a topic as vast as this. And you've given us a great overview today, and you've showed us some amazing examples that people I know, I can tell some people's minds have been blown here in the chat. And hopefully we've given them...
wonderful. Yeah, we haven't been in contact with the chat at all, but
well, hopefully we're giving them something to, a jumping off point, which is what these things are great for. And yeah, like I said, I think you're a great down to earth guy. I think you're doing a service to the conspiracy community because you're presenting it in a down to earth, level headed manner, which is what a lot of, unfortunately, presenters in this community lack. They are quite, like I said, over the top assertive and rambunctious about their beliefs and what they found, to the point of not enough scrutiny. You know, we do have to hold ourselves up to higher standards if we want to be taken seriously. And I think you're doing a great job of that. So thank you. I appreciate the work you do on that.
I appreciate the compliment.
Yeah. So in terms of the
Yeah. I just thought of one other thing
Sure,
that I
go.
didn't mention is, you know, there were guys in the 1800s. There was two, I think three different guys in Italy they knew how to petrify flesh. You know, we were talking before we started recording about geopolymer a little bit. That was a big penny drop for me. I mean, geopolymer is a very real thing also. It's not just titans and, you know, trees and everything. There's a lot of stuff around our realm that appears to be man-made, but on a scale that we can hardly fathom. And you know, they knew mixtures for making geopolymers a long time ago that you know, that information has been hidden away. Well, they also knew how to petrify flesh. And there was a guy named Girolamo Sagato. There's still museums in Italy that have his works there, of, you know, you name it, he petrified it, when it comes to body parts and organs and things like that. So it's not like a harebrained idea that has no substance. There's actual evidence. I showed the picture of the petrified brain, and I didn't. Maybe at the end I can get in a little bit on the
Sure.
subject of the heartstones. But yeah, I would like to hear some of your thoughts about, you know, like what I mentioned, the apocryphal texts and, you know, mythology, because so much you've done so much deep research into these subjects, and I've heard you touch on these things in different ways in interviews.
Yeah, well,
So
it's evidence. It's evidence to me, and I think everybody there's been multiple cataclysmic events throughout the timeline of history, even from a biblical standard, you know, and the great flood of Noah and the antediluvian age leading up to that is probably the biggest example of where we're getting these Titan-type mountain creatures like this elephant you're talking about here. It seems like these are of a time before a great flood of some kind. But also, I also agree with you, and obviously I think Jay Dreamer's adding the channel of the Plasma Apocalypse guy. There's evidence as well that the Earth has been utterly decimated by the Lichtenberg figures, as you showed them. I've said for a long time the Grand Canyon is quite clearly electrical phenomena. It's been torn out of the ground through extremely fast-moving lightning, just running across the ground. Basically, it's obvious that's what it is from the sky because we can recreate it scientifically. Repeatable patterns you can recreate yourself with a bit of electricity and a piece of wood. It's not difficult, and it's so I agree. So not only have we had a trial by water, but I think we've had a destruction by fire and electricity as well in our history. I think there's evidence.
Let me interject a little bit, because that's an important point. Because when, you know, I showed that the wood grain getting burned, you know, by the electrodes, and what's happening to the elements in that wood is they're aligning themselves along that fractal line, right? So if you think about the Grand Canyon, or you think about these trees getting hit by plasma, there's potentially a transmutation of elements, and so a lot of people are like, well, you know, it was the silica era, like the trees were made of stone. And you know, I don't believe that at all. I believe they were tree, and in fact, there's stuff all over the UK where there's all these dwellings in sandstone. I believe those dwellings were carved while that was still wood. To me, that has all of the signs of wood. Paul Cook thinks it's, you know, geopolymer that's been squirted from giant 3D printers that he evoked. But I think I've shown, I did a whole video, you know, comparing those theories, called Bio-Geology, Geopolymers, and Lies. But you know, so I think that the trees were alive, just like our trees are alive now, but they were on a scale we can't even imagine.
Well,
and then
we know that
taken down.
We know in the Bible it explains how the angels cut down the trees, so the giants couldn't escape the flood. Basically.
Yeah, and the Book of Enoch as well.
The Book of Enoch makes it clear. Yeah, it's kind of like and the Book of Giants and the Book of Enoch and any apocryphal text that talks about that antediluvian age. Things were bigger, people lived longer, and there were... Think about this. If the people were bigger then, you can't imagine how big the giants were. Okay,
Yeah.
like even the people alone, and who were perhaps next to an elephant the size of a mountain, the person may have been not so far off the height of that elephant, just a normal person, you know. And so the trees
Yeah.
themselves, the scale would have just been larger to the point where it's as though they're existing like we exist with our trees, but from our perspective, we're tiny compared to them. You know, so even the trees were big. So it's not like they were maybe among towering behemoth trees themselves. They may have been tall enough that they could climb the tree quite easily to the top. You know,
Right.
we don't really
Exactly.
know.
Like our size related to trees
Yeah,
today.
it's all relative.
And even
It's all relative,
even in
yeah.
the mainstream geological narrative, they talk about five great, devastations that annihilated the species all around the world.
Mm.
And they talk about dragonflies that were nearly a meter long. Well, if a dragonfly is a meter long, how big was a cow or a horse?
Exactly.
Or an elephant. Now we're talking about something like the size of that. And the interesting thing about Mont Go, that's the name of the elephant mountain here, is it's roughly 5 kilometers long.
Mm-hmm.
And and then it's 753 meters in height, but it's lying down. So, if it was standing up, more than a kilometer tall.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the Book of Enoch, it talks about the Titans had a height, and they were roughly 3,000 ells. And an L, I don't remember the exact measurement, but 3,000 ells equates to 1 mile. So the Book of Enoch is saying that these beings were 1 mile tall.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, well, that's perfect. So that was the thing, Roger's 1,000 mile long dragon, I still think that could be real. I don't agree with his cosmology whatsoever. I think it's absurd that he still thinks that we're on this spinning ball with something that size, and that, that grayscale photographs from NASA are Titan body parts that are floating in space. That's his narrative. But if the Earth is a lot bigger than we were taught,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe a creature that size could have existed. And I've always felt that we live in a holographic universe, that things are fractal. And just like you can go down to the microscopic, you can go to the macroscopic. And maybe Mont Go is one level up from us, and one level up from Mont Go would be the dragon in the Sahara. And maybe it just goes on infinitely like that.
Mm.
I don't know how the universe is constructed. But I mentioned transmutation of elements. So I think that can happen electrically, but it also happens biologically. The simplest example I always give is a chicken egg. They know when they've looked at the diet of a chicken and it's eating mica all throughout the day, they've measured how much calcium is in the chicken's diet, and the chicken egg contains more calcium than the chicken is consuming. So where does the calcium come from? We're told that all the elements on the periodic table are coming from the heart of stars that then have to supernova and spread their stuff out into the universe. I think it's far more likely that things are created through biological processes, and we're told lies about the periodic table, and we're just scratching the surface of what there is to know about all this, because we've been misled about everything.
Mm-hmm. I know. I agree. I mean, there's so many things you touched upon which my mind was firing away. You're talking about levels of dimensions, and it's if and a lot of this is speculation, but I do think people were bigger before the flood, and I think as time has gone on through the natural law of entropy and decay, we've gotten smaller. Just as with each iteration, things get smaller and lesser and lose more information as they get copies and copies and copies of themselves as they go down. Things don't evolve as we've been told. Things are actually constantly decaying. It's in the complete complete opposite, in fact. With that in mind, I think before the flood, huge people, and then giants on top of them as the offspring of fallen angels and basically human women, and created these. And things got wacky and out of hand. That would explain things like mountain ranges and huge formations that we can't. From our perspective now, we wouldn't look at that and think, the remains of a humanoid-like creature. We just can't think that way until you start getting these out there kind of histories and ideas. But then I was reminded of a book, I think it was by C.S. Lewis, and I can't remember, it was something about a bus. It was a book about a bus, maybe it was a short story, but he was trying to explain. I think it was called The Holiday or something like that, and basically the premise is people from hell get to once a year or so often go on a holiday through a bus to heaven. and they get to see the people in heaven as comparison to hell. And the catch is at the end, spoilers, when the people go back to hell, they actually get smaller. They get in this bus, but they're not moving anywhere. And they don't realize it, but what they're doing, they're just shrinking and getting smaller and smaller and smaller, small enough that they fall through a crack in the ground and go even smaller and smaller into the ground. And it's the idea that hell is this insignificant place, you know what I mean, which is inhabited, and it's actually compared to heaven on a different dimension. It's actually talking about scale of size. And I thought maybe there's a parallel here to how the world once was to where it's fallen to today. And it has this element of things shrinking to it. Maybe Lewis knew something we didn't. I just remembered that short story in the back of my head from years ago. So that brought it to mind. But in terms of like petrification, I mean, you don't have to get into extra biblical text for this. So let's talk about the day of the Lord, the judgment that came upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot's wife turned to look, and she turned to a pillar of salt.
Right.
So this idea that, electrical fervent heat of the wrath of the Lord coming down and utterly decimating a place. Maybe there's something about eye contact, consciousness contact to that source, made a connection. It got her and petrified her instantly or something like that. Medusa, I've heard Medusa,
Right.
Obviously she could turn people to stone. Links to fear there, but yeah, maybe there was some kind of... I think Gorgons were real entities, by the way. I don't think they were like a representation of plasma phenomena with the hair.
Well, here's a fun synchronicity. This mountain, which I believe is a petrified creature, the river that goes alongside of it is called Gata de Gorgos, named after the Gorgons, which were the three sisters, one of whom was Medusa. Mm-hmm. So, what are the odds that, like, the river going alongside of it is named after the goddess from Greek mythology that could petrify things on sight?
Well, yeah. I believe Medusa, the Gorgons were it depends what story you go off from Greek mythology, because there's different mythologies, but I think the main one is Typhon, the sea serpent god, mated with Echidna, the mother of monsters. And she was like a siren, half human, half snake, double snake-legged woman or something like that. And she birthed like all the monsters, like Cerberus, the Hydra, the Chimera, the Gorgons. And she's just like known for that. But I think there was real. I think that's basically a daughter of Cain who became a siren, as it says in the Book of Enoch, mating with a sea serpent, which is a fallen angel, seraphim, to create the Gorgons, which are a hybrid between humans and serpents. And if you look at them, the old depictions of Gorgons aren't Medusa with snakes for hair. The first ones, it's like more of a humanoid shape. She's got wings, human legs, human arms, but a huge bulging eyes and a big wide mouth with fangs and like this ugly monster thing, like a clown, if you want to. And
I was just thinking to that.
Yeah, she actually has red dreadlocks, not snakes for her in the original rock art depictions. But I do know there's this theory out there, mainly from like the Thunderbolts project. They came up with the idea of symbols of an alien sky. Like a plasma apocalypse happened from the alignments of the planets, and what people call Medusa was Venus with all the wild plasma strings coming off. But I don't buy that. I don't think that actually explains, because that can't work on the true cosmological level. It's not planetary.
Yeah, I think they're spot on with the electric universe idea.
Yeah.
With a lot of stuff, but I think that they should be incorporating it into a different model of when it comes to the Earth.
Well, to get onto that, I think you wanted to talk about this, but I've been getting is this idea, haven't I, that the day of the final day of the Lord has already come, and the and the judgment has come upon the earth already through tribulation. And,
I think that's very compelling.
The wrath of God,
the millennial reign of Christ having already occurred, and
this
being Tartaria. And
what you need to really think about in terms of your theory is tribulation has happened, and tribulation is like, it's the day of the Lord times 10. It's Sodom and Gomorrah and then some. No flesh left alive unless those days were cut short, type of thing. What was left after that was nothing. Remnants of humanity, a few survivors, if that, We're talking about continents shifting from away from each other. We're talking about every volcano going off all at once. We're talking about the sun going dark for like years. You're talking about just famines, death, destruction, wars, everything. And the day
great.
The day of the Lord comes with, cities will melt like wax in his presence.
There's your meltology,
but there's your
stuff.
Probably, I'm guessing, your plasma apocalypse too.
When I started to find these stones that I recognize were very likely organs, specifically hearts. I mean, all of the other organs are there. I get that question a lot, but the hearts are very distinct because they have a lot of very specific anatomy. And so if you find a random fragment of a rock that's shaped like a heart, okay, it's great. It's banged around, smoothed around a river bottom. But if you start finding a whole bunch of them that all have very, very specific anatomical features, we started to touch on that with the mountain. Like, how many coincidences have to line up before you take a step back and go, that can't be a coincidence, right? It's like mathematically impossible. And I recognized a stone that I saw in a river bottom. I was like, this looks a lot like a heart. And I took it home and I started looking at it, and I got out my anatomy books from college, and I found, I mean, now that I went in with endoscopic camera, I had a CAT scanned 23 different anatomical features in that one stone. That's a massive number, and they're very specific. And I show them with video, endoscopy. With the CAT scans, you can see the inner chambers. It's just way, way too much. And in fact, one of the top cardiologists in the world has seen some of these some photographs, and I had a WhatsApp call with him, and his response was, "Congratulations, it's an incredible discovery." That's that was pretty cool. So this is a very reoccurring shape that I've found over and over again. So you've got this harp shape and a tapering in on the sides. So when the heart dies, when the body dies, all the muscles go into contraction. We call it rigor mortis. So when the heart contracts, it tapers in on the sides, and more on one side than the other, because the wall is thicker on one side, and on the other side it's thinner. The top is where the aorta and the vena cava are, which are the two biggest blood vessels in the body. And then the bottom, when the heart is contracting, it twists like this. From the bottom, it looks like a propeller. And so you can see this twist. So to find one stone like that with maybe 10 different features that match up with heart anatomy, okay, what are the odds, But to find it over and over again with the exact same features, and I have hundreds of examples, and it's scalable. There's another very specific feature where the heart is a rope. It's the myocardioventricular band. Let me show a 1-minute video real quick to show people this, because this is mind-blowing. People, even cardiologists, don't know this information. You've got people who are literally cutting into the heart to do operations who don't know the true anatomical structure of the heart. It was discovered by a Spanish cardiologist named Francisco Torrent Guasp in 1972. And let me share the screen here. Where is the screen sharing? Have I been sharing this whole time?
Yeah, but I've been moving the thing around so they can't see it. But you're already screen sharing currently if you want to.
Oh, I am. Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let me just go back to this. I couldn't figure out what was going on there because I had this little thing with us. There we go. Minimize that, right? Because there we go.
I just see Stellium7 right now in a pink border with some trees.
Yeah. So, and this is going to get back to what you were saying about the tribulation as well, because this is these are just a bunch of examples of this reoccurring pattern over and over again. Heart, blood vessels at the top, and then there's a line there that I just did with my thumb, and you can see it here. You can see it faintly here. You can see it there. So every one of these characteristics that we staple on should make it harder and harder to find a stone like that, right? The longer the list, like this is my just basic heart stone evaluation criteria list, right? And so let me show you this little video, because this is amazing. People don't know this about the heart.
Did you know that almost everything you were taught about the heart is wrong? Most everyone today, even doctors, still believe the heart to be a 4-chamber pump that pushes blood through a mind-boggling 60,000 miles of narrowing blood vessels to fuel our 40 trillion cells, then filling again as if by magic on relaxation. Well, that theory was thoroughly debunked by the Spanish cardiologist Francisco Torrent Guasp back in 1972. After dissecting thousands of hearts, Guasp finally discovered the heart's true structure.
Look
The heart's
closely
far
here.
more amazing than we ever knew. It's like a rope, a long tube wrapped into a knot. Instead of being pushed, the blood is pulled through the heart in two spiraling vortexes.
There's your
This has been
toroidal
proven
field,
with CAT
right?
scans, functional MRI, and positronic emission. Look at the spiraling contraction.
This isn't a
It
theory.
changes
This has been
everything we know
proven
about
in
the
a
heart
variety of
and
ways.
circulation.
You can see
If
it
you'd
there.
like to know more, check out these videos.
So that man, believe it or not, lived and worked his entire career at the foothills of this mountain.
What are the odds, eh?
What are the odds? And I didn't know anything about that until I had started finding these stones. And you're still seeing my screen share, right?
Yeah, I can see both. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is I've gone in with CAT scan, and then this is endoscopic camera. And this, if this was water erosion, as we would be told, then that should be smooth inside, and that is actually not. This is what the inside of the heart looks like. It's called trabecula carne, which is like, there's that trabecula word again, right? Trabecular bone I was talking about before. It's this lumpy, fractal-like Swiss cheese kind of a look, and that's exactly what the inside of that stone looks like.
Incredible.
So, and this begs the question, like, if these are truly hearts, what the heck happened to the body? And I didn't know. I kept finding these things, and they were lining up more and more with anatomy in a way that I just couldn't believe. And that's the evaluation criteria. This was the first one I found, and this has so many details in it that are just, you know, spot on with the anatomy. This is the opening of the coronary artery, right where it should be. Between the left atrium and the left ventricle, there's usually this fatty portion. If you look at hearts, you know, an image search of hearts, well, here, it's the next, you can see right here.
Yeah.
This section here and here, that's like, what are the odds that this one has got that right there? But it's also got an indentation here, and that indentation between the left atrium and ventricle is where the coronary artery sits, which is the one that usually gives people heart attacks. And it's called the coronary sulcus, and sulcus means indentation. So it's just, you know, the outside of this thing is white, but everywhere the white has eroded or broken away, if you wet this under water, it's bright red, like beef. It's wild. So I didn't understand how it could be possible. And again, I was just thinking of the scientific method. What I found was repeatable. It was scalable. I found them, you know, from tiny, like millimeters long. This is the biggest one in my office. That's 1.5 feet. There's that isthmus again between this is the pulmonary arteries, and then on the back is the opening for the aorta, exactly where it should be. And then the reason I brought up that video of the heart initially is I wanted to go back to these first ones I showed, because these lines are here. So when he folded the heart back up, that was when my mind just went, because I realized that the bunch of the stones that I had found already had those lines in exactly the right place. So they had all these other features as well, but they had those lines too. So I went back to my collection immediately, and I started finding them all over the place. And since then, I've had a lot of different subscribers have sent me photographs, and many more, even fleshier examples are
Wow, look at that.
out there. So in this particular region where I live, all the rock, you know, I don't know, maybe it got hit multiple times or something, but everything's kind of white until you break them open. I've got a video called Broken Hearts Tell Tales, where I went into the river bottom and broke them open, and they look very fleshy inside. And so that led me to this theory, which is what you were talking about with tribulation and, you know, Sodom and Gomorrah times 1,000. I figured if the organs were still there, but the bodies weren't, then the only way that that could be is if the outer portion of the body was destroyed. So I started thinking about the chest and abdominal cavities. Like you've got these thick, fatty, what's called the pleura, which is holding all the organs inside, right? Our heart, our kidneys, all of that, the intestines, they're all floating in fluid. And each one of the organs is surrounded in its own little fatty sac.
Yeah.
And the heart has the thickest of the fatty sacs known as the pericardium. So I started thinking about a boiled egg, right? What you put it in the water for 6, 7, 8, 12 minutes. Already at 12, most people probably wouldn't want to eat it, right? Well, what happens if you put that in much hotter temperature for a longer period of time? It's going to get really, really hard. But actually, it doesn't, because what happens is the eggshell breaks and the the material that's inside starts to leak out. Well, that wouldn't happen with the pericardium, which is very flexible. So the pericardium could handle that expansion or hardening of the material inside. And so my theory was that whether I initially I thought I was thinking volcanic activity, and later I came across the plasma stuff, and I was like, oh, of course, that makes perfect sense, and the Lichtenberg figures and everything. And then I learned about instant petrification in microwaves and that they can make petrified wood in 24 hours. And it's just one thing after another lined up for this theory that these organs could harden while the outer portion of the body would be destroyed. And I showed the bog body earlier, which is, that's not even heat. That's just with, highly acidic or base liquid that's causing the organs to harden and everything else inside to dissolve. So it's a pretty wild that there are actual examples. That's the bog body I showed before.
Mm.
These instant forms of petrification. And so getting back to the boiled egg theory, I had theorized that all these things listed here would petrify into varying forms of quartz. And the interesting thing about blood plasma is if you remove all of the water from it and you separate the red blood cells out, so you've just got this yellow portion, you're looking at long chain fatty acids. And if you remove all the water from that, this is what it looks like. This is human serum albumin, and it looks a heck of a lot like quartz. So what happened to all the bones and everything? Well, if you make bone broth, you put it in a crock pot and relatively mild heat for some hours, it turns to sponge, and then eventually everything that's bone turns to a clear gelatinous material. And if you keep going with it, it becomes broth. So it was just, one thing after another that lined up, in perfect alignment with these ideas.
Fascinating to think, isn't it, that the bone turns and evaporates away under these conditions like tribulation, but the organs turn to stone. It's just such an odd reversal of what you would imagine to be the remains, and I guess if you're thinking about this, like, you're just finding these hearts everywhere. They're just scattered all over the earth, just hearts. And I mean, that would be the remains of a population of humanity that was utterly wiped out in almost like an instant, in many pockets of reality and all over the place. I mean, there are and not just the humans, the animals. No, the organs of everything that was on the earth, just destroyed. I mean, I don't think it explains these titan trees you're showing. I think these are older. I think these were already there.
I think there have been multiple cataclysms, and even the mainstream geological narrative supports that. So, I've got one video that's called "Spelunking Titanic Trees." This is an incredible subject because, I mean, you can see the water coming out of this tree, coming out of the knot. Well, how big would the channel in that tree have to be to permit this much water to come out? Well, there's guys called the Action Venture Twins that are going down into these channels deep into the earth, 1,000 feet down, and then they're going into sideways channels that are snaking off in other directions, and then encountering another channel that goes in another direction. Like, might it be something like this, perhaps, that they're going through? I think so. And if you see their footage, there's a lot of areas that were, the mainstream geological narrative would probably tell you it was formed through some kind of water erosion, but there's no signs of erosion. because it's like chunky and hard and broken. Like it wasn't formed through water flowing through it. Same thing with the trabecular bone that I'm finding all over Mont Go. And then this is, these trees are tapping into groundwater. Well, titanic trees would probably tap into the primary water. And what would happen if you cut them all down? Maybe a worldwide flood because you'd be freeing up
Ah.
all that water, right?
Interesting thought. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah,
That's a great way to
right.
think
So
about it.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and then you've got the anomaly of lava tubes that that are just the lava formed this?
Mm.
How does that fluid carve this smooth, round, and they're not always smooth. That's the thing. If it's formed by lava, why are they chunky and lumpy like this one?
It's kind of a gaslighting smack in the
I
face,
think we've
isn't
been
it?
gaslit about
Oh
everything.
yeah,
And
it is.
then
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
then you've got
Lava,
this
lava
subject.
did that. It's like, you know what lava does. We know how it flows, and it's kind of
Right.
like the point to these, like said, those hexagonal columns. It's like, oh yeah, that was just lava coming out of the ground. It's like, oh you,
Yeah.
it's like, and if you say
And
anything, everyone's gonna think you're stupid, and everyone's gonna think you
Right.
deny science. You don't want to be one of those guys, do
Yeah.
you?
Oh,
It's kind
yeah.
of like, okay,
Well, I coined the term paradigm blindness because
yeah.
like why can't we see when we look at something that's clearly biological in stone? Why don't we see it? Well, it's because we've been taught that that's not what it is, and it's impossible for
Mhm.
those sorts of things to happen, except maybe in the rarest of circumstances. So, why do we not see it? Because we've been blinded. Why do we think the horizon is curved when horizontal means flat,
Mhm.
and water seems to lay flat and we can see too far? Well, because we're taught that it curves. So, when we and experts, why are they blinded to these things? Like geologists, why can't they see something so simple like that? Those photographs that I was showing before that are obviously tree, but on a monumental scale. Why can't they see the bloody obvious? They come up with, oh, this is shale and it's formed in this way or that way, and then they've got all these, mental gymnastics where they're like they did with Devil's Tower to fit in the empirical evidence into some kind of geological narrative. I don't think they're intentionally lying, the vast majority of them. I think there may be gatekeepers at the top who know the truth, and they probably are deeply tied in with the mining companies, like I alluded to before.
Mhm.
But ultimately, I think the vast majority are blinded by their paradigm. It's the same with medicine. It's the same with all of the ologies. So paradigm blindness is a very real thing. And
Mhm.
then if you start to question, then cognitive dissonance kicks in, and they become very defensive, and call you a pseudoscientist, or bring up the Dunning-Kruger effect and whatnot. So we're told that these plateaus here, that these waterfalls it can't possibly be coming from rainfall. So where are they coming from? Well, they're called artesian wells, like art as an artery, maybe.
Mhm.
And if you think again about these giant trees having channels like what you see in this picture, it all makes perfect sense. So that's what I was saying before. Syncretism. You mentioned Jerry Jay Dreamers. He was one of the people that originally got me on the idea. It was this and Roger's work that got me thinking about Montco, and that it might actually potentially be an elephant. Um, but I realized if you open your mind too much, then your brain might fall out. So that's why I was so cautious when I went about, um, you know, taking up these subjects, and where's there we go. Stop sharing.
Well, you do have to be careful, and I've had people, many of the labels you throw out there, people have thrown at me plenty of times. I've even had people throw what you just did there at the end. If you open your mind too much, your brain will fall out, Paul. And it's kind of like,
Mhm.
I don't even think I'm that out there with some of the stuff I say, to be honest. So a lot of that I don't take to heart personally. But no, I agree. You do have to be a little bit. You always have to be open to be wrong. I think there's a lot of people out there in our community who are so certain about things to their own detriment sometimes. And I've been dealing with my own cognitive dissonance barrage of attacks from people who don't like thinking that maybe, like I said, revelation's already happened. Tribulation's already come and we're past 1,000-year reign. I've physically seen the cognitive dissonance happen with those people, and these are from people who are otherwise supposed to be open to the truth and truth seekers who already had many other paradigms shifted. And it's kind of like, it doesn't matter how like much you've learned, there's always going to be some pills that are too hard to swallow for some people as well. So never mind the academic community, and it happens in every culture and community, even the truther community. And but this particular topic, I'm sold. I'm on board with this. I think you've nailed it. I've already been thinking for ages. Like, yeah, that's a tree. Those rocks, those boulders, that's wood. You know, that's quite clearly flesh over there. I've already been looking at the world like that for years. So you're preaching to the choir here, personally.
Yeah, I mean, people get a little overzealous when they start looking into this, because the most common thing I see is, oh, I found a bunch of livers, and it's like, okay, well, I haven't even found that. I mean, I found a couple rocks that could be livers. They're shaped liver-ish, you know. Livers have lobes just like lungs do, so I would imagine that rocks would cleave in that way, so we might not see a liver as a liver. But I would expect if it was a liver that there would be openings for the blood vessels and that sort of thing. But that's why I focused on the hearts, because they were the most specific and the most unusual shape also. Like I showed those other ones. So here's another example of it, right? So you've got the harp shape, and you've got the flattened top, and then there's an indentation right at the top where the aorta would have been. And then they'll be faceted on the front, and then the back will curve inward like this. And that's exactly because of that contraction that the heart's doing. And then you can see that twist at the bottom. That's a lot of specific things for a random broken. So the mainstream story is that this broke off of a larger piece, banged around in a river bottom, and took on this shape and had all of these features. And when I start finding lines going through them in the right places, that theory goes out the window, in my opinion, right? Because that's far too specific. This propeller twist is, and especially why would the holes always be at the top, right? You know, it's just like,
yeah.
And then the other thing is, one side is wide and the other side is narrow. That's exactly what the heart does, because the right ventricle has a thin wall. So when it contracts and it tapers in, it also narrows this way as well. So that's just another one that lines up perfectly with what you would expect to find in a petrified heart.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, I remember, let's talk about the lines in the sky for a little bit. I can't use the word because I'll end up with a stupid thing at the bottom. But look at that, incredible.
That one, I have a video called Slicing Heartstones, and I polished this side, and I left that one unpolished so you could see the difference.
Yeah.
The color isn't coming through, but here you don't see the color at all unless you put it underwater. Here you can see it, but it's not really.
You can see the flesh as well. You can see where the caverns have closed, where the air.
And you see the quartz crystal. So there you have, this. It's like, and then also you've got the creases at the top and the back, right where the blood vessels would be. So it's so repeatable, it's scalable, it's specific, and it's predictable also, because I found rocks that were like buried halfway up, and I've looked at it, I go, oh, there's another one. and I can tell I'm looking at the back side of the rock. And so I'm like, I know what the other side is going to look like. And I predict it, and then I pull it out, and it looks that way.
Do you remember though? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But when people started noticing what was going on in the sky and these odd clouds were appearing that don't look like any cloud they've ever seen before you know it, science has an explanation for these, and they gave them a name, and they called them cirrus clouds. And these are caused when specific atmospheric conditions happen that create these string effects and so forth. And suddenly, a phenomenon which we know is caused by man, it now has a natural cause and effect explained in the science books.
They even call them homogeneous, like human created. It's even in the Latin, but people don't realize that they're saying that. Have they done that
for you yet with your heartstones? Do they have a geological explanation specifically for why that?
I have a 3-hour video on my channel. I sent these off to a prestigious laboratory in the US. Someone contacted me, wanted to have them analyzed, and offered to pay me for them. And I was like, no, I just want the data. Just, I'll send you the stones. You can pay for shipping if you want, and I'd like them back when you're done. And I thought I was going to get data, and I got the biggest runaround ever. I called the video Paradigm Crushed because this was clearly gatekeeping, and they made a whole bunch of claims about me and about the stones that were completely unsubstantiated. And it took me 6 weeks, almost 2 months to make that rebuttal video. It's definitely worth watching because you'll see what happens when some little guy working out of his office comes across some groundbreaking discovery, tries to go up against an entire ology. This is the kind of stuff you're going to be faced with, is a bunch of people that are saying, oh no, stunning Kruger and this, that, and the other. But so yeah,
I guarantee
it
though
was
that your rock
Paradigm
shape,
Crushed.
yeah.
It's definitely worth seeing if you've got the time.
I bet you will see.
I
in the
had
next
90
decade.
I had 90 minutes of audio because they recorded the first call with me. And then they recorded the call between the two of them when they were going over and reviewing the findings. So I had 90 minutes of conversation that I created visuals for. So it wasn't just them with their Latin terms and their, know-it-all attitudes. I was showing, this is what they're claiming. Here it is. This is what it's called. This is what it looks like. Does that match what I sent them?
So they named it.
They did no lab work. I got no numbers, not a single number. The only thing they did was a 1-page survey of 100 people where they took one of the rocks and asked the people what they thought the rock looked like. And then they got their answers. This was their idea of science, and they had the gall to mock me. I was like, I'm going after these guys. So they made fools of themselves. And you can see how it went down. It's definitely entertaining.
So they do have an explanation, so-called, for your rock shape.
They're said to be polycalcitic conglomerate cobbles. Poly means many. Calcitic means multiple types of calcite. So multiple calcite, it's just a mineral. Polycalcitic conglomerate means a mix of a bunch of different materials, right? Like a geopolymer is a conglomerate, right? Conglomerate cobbles. Cobble means cobblestone. That's what the old streets of the cities are made from. Cobble. What are cobblestones? River rock. What do they tell us river rock is? Broken fragments that banged around and just magically turned into this, right? Here's one. And this is one of the rocks that I actually sent them. And they claimed that there was no, in the stones that I sent them, there was nothing that matched the anatomy of a heart other than the overall shape. And I mean, this has the blood vessels right where they should be. And I didn't send them my best ones because I was afraid I'd never see them again. But I sent them good ones. And I made a video called An Exciting Research Day before I sent them off. And I filmed every rock I sent them, and I showed the rocks in 360 degrees and from the top and the bottom so people could see exactly what they look like. These are the ones I chose. This is why I chose them. I sent them in, and I got back a survey. And the survey was clearly fabricated because the last three were just ridiculous things that, like, okay, maybe one person would say it, but you wouldn't have 3 or 5 people saying that exact same very odd take on what the rock looked like. So even that was a fabrication. It was a joke. So
well, there we go then. I had a feeling something.
Be careful out there, people.
I had a feeling the mainstream official science would have tried to name your stones and explain it away, because it's what they tend to do when people discover the truth. But even then,
they told me I could call them HSS, and that I could write a paper and turn it into a geological peer-reviewed journal, and then maybe my name would be associated with the HSS, which is heart-shaped stones, rather than being heart stones or petrified hearts. They look that way. And they were suggesting that I do that.
Yeah,
because
don't play
because
by
I could
their
get my
rules.
name associated.
Don't play into that game. Forget about it. They're all.
I never held the illusion that mainstream academia would adopt any of these ideas, and that's why from the beginning I just put the information out there for free on my channel. I didn't monetize my channel for like 2 years or more, and the only reason I did that was because Google algorithms they said they were going to be favoring content that would earn them money. And I thought, oh, that sounds like a way to down-regulate truth or content, right? And so I was like, I'll just monetize it. And it's I haven't made much money from it, that's for sure. But yeah, it was quite the experience
Yeah.
to go through
It's,
that.
it's,
And
it's, it's slimy of them. It's kind of like, well, maybe you should write a peer review up to our standards by our means and play our game, and then we might take you seriously as long as you capitulate to our version of events. It's kind of like, no, I'm just going to do my own thing in my own way and let the public decide. And they're scared of
Totally.
that. They're scared of that attitude. And I said ages ago, and it's kind of like you get these people, especially in Christian communities, who are trying to impress the academic or trying to play by their rules in a way. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, and it's kind of, I'm not one of those naive Christians. I'm a Christian who knows about space and all these type of things. You know, they try and do it that way, and they try and explain like Genesis from a mainstream scientific perspective, and try and fit
there's a mainstream Christian PhD geologist he's done some great work, and he's talked about a lot of interesting stuff. His name is Andrew Snelling. I'm not sure where he stands on the cosmological question, but he's definitely talked about instant petrification a lot. I learned a bunch of things from him. I've got a little 2-minute video on rapid petrification that's him talking on my channel.
Good for him. Good for him. Because, like I said, most of them in those academic circles capitulate and play their game because they don't want to lose face. They don't want to lose their scholarship, or make people think they're crazy. So they kind of betray their own faith and belief in their own.
There's a lot of stuff that comes back to the Bible. I'm not a Christian.
Yeah.
I didn't approach this from like I'm trying to prove the Bible perspective at all. I'm open to the possibility that it may be real. And there's a lot when it comes to these apocryphal texts and different things that seem to be all lining up with mythology and with these ancient stories. So, but I want to come back to peer review real quickly, because that's said to be like, that's the best, that's the highest level of research. Double-blind, randomized, controlled trial, peer-reviewed. And what is peer review, really? It's a bunch of people with the same ideology who are reading something to determine whether it has merit. That's what we call a logical fallacy. It's called appeal to authority, right? They're the authority, and they're the arbiters of truth. They're the ones that decide what gets in and what gets out. And these guys that gave me the runaround, the guy who owns a lab, he's on YouTube giving a presentation, very high level presentation. I watched it before I sent the stones off, because I checked into these guys a bit and I wanted to know who they were. My screen's about to go off. So he's got this hour and a half video where he's giving a presentation on his expertise and his findings of different things at the Explorers Club in New York City, which I hadn't heard of. And I was like, Explorers Club, that sounds interesting. I'm going to explore it. So I did, and I found out it's like the premier explorer club in the world. It's where like Edmund Hillary, first guy to go up, Everest, the first guy to go to the North Pole, first guy to go to the South Pole. Lots of astronauts. They're all members of this club. People like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. And I mean, it was just like, the more I dug into it, I'm like, this sounds like adventure gatekeeping to me. And I think that's exactly what it was. So the last half an hour of my Paradigm Crushed video is me doing a little expose on the Explorers Club. That's worth watching too.
It's like, oh, you don't need to explore anything. It's already all been explored.
We've already, yeah. Well, that was why space, like I was a space junkie as a kid, until Flat Earth came along, and I was like, wait a minute, I don't know shit about anything. It's like, what's really going on here? I was always like, geology and archaeology, like I said before, super boring subjects. We're at the pinnacle of civilization. We're the best that's ever been, and now we're going to space, and we have to go to space, because if we don't, an asteroid might strike us and wipe out the entire species, right? Or the whole planet. So if we don't get out into space and seed the cosmos, like there's your Star Trek, Star Wars narratives, we're doomed, and it's like, and geology and the timelines of geology are all supporting heliocentrism. right? You can't have the heliocentric model without the geological model when it comes to timelines. And they go hand in hand. So, we're literally dealing with the tapestry of our matrix reality when we're looking at this stuff.
I feel like it's falling apart though. The
It
narratives, the
is.
narratives they've spun they're not convincing a new generation anymore, who are highly skeptical and do not trust authority more and more and more. I know people say we're still a minority, like people like us who are just even having conversations like this, or the people in the chat today listening, But it's kind of, I don't know. I think the tides are turning. I think the narratives are crumbling and laughable. People are seeing how absolutely ridiculous they actually are now.
Yeah, the emperor wears no clothes, and
yeah.
The curtain has been pulled back, and thankfully Toto did that for what's her name? Wizard of Oz. Toto pulls back the curtain
Dorothy?
and reveals it. Dorothy, thank you. Right? Dorothy isn't the one who figured it out. Toto had, the little assisting animal had to like go. He sniffed it out. He realized there was a rat, and he exposed the rat. And now we've got so many people doing this in every direction and every ology. And the only thing they can do to really put a lid on it now is to like shut down the internet or to start World War III, which they seem to want to do both. So but I mean, World War III has been going on for a long time. It's just fifth generational warfare, right? It's information warfare.
Who knows how it's going to pan out? I mean, I'm excited to be here with you on the front line, Stellium, doing something about this. However it's going to pan out, who knows? But this has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you.
I've learned so much.
So fun. I was really glad you invited me on.
Yeah,
and I at some point I'm gonna start doing more interviews on my channel. I've only done 2 interviews in the whole time I've had the channel. I've probably been interviewed like 50 times, but I want to do more, and I definitely want to have you on and talk about your book, and I'll go more after I've read your book. I have it right here.
Wait, would you look at that? You have a hardcover as well. Well done.
That's right.
Feels good, doesn't it, in the hand?
Yeah.
I'm just selling it right now. Yeah, it's weighty. Yeah. It's a good thick book.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely have you on, and I'll have more of a list of things that dovetail with what you've written about, because we kind of touched on a bunch of them, but there are things that came up in your talk with Topher that I was like, oh, that relates to this and this relates to that. And so
sure thing.
Yeah, to be continued. Thank you. I hope your the people following you enjoyed it, and that they realize that I'm not just I'm not just a Roger Spur copycat,
No, not at all. I mean, we had about 308 people here at its peak, which was amazing.
Oh, wow.
The chat's been going well. Everyone's there. Wendy's been helping us out, keeping it civil. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy.
We really
World's
appreciate
best mod. She's a mod on my channel as well.
She is the best, isn't she? That's it. She's always there. Never lets me down. Thankful for that. But yeah, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this talk. Mike, thanks for being here. Not only will I come into your show if you ask, I also do a podcast called The Truth of Therapy Session, where we can get into stuff that isn't really about your work. We can just get into what it is to be in this world and what it's like, and how
we could all, I would love to explore more in a lot more detail the machinations of the psychedelic stuff that we touched on before, and the different organizations involved, and who's who, and because there's a lot. I was talking with some friends, and I kind of laid out over the course of an hour all of these data points, and they're like, you should do videos on this subject, or it's like that. I've heard a lot of these things before, but you just presented it in such a concise way. So it'd be fun to do that in dialogue with you, because I'd like to hear your insights on those things as well, because I know you've done your homework.
Yeah, I dabbled for a long time, but I left that life behind, but I certainly remember it all with a clear memory. So yeah, we can talk about that. Any topic you want, Mike. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We'll definitely get you back on sometime. To all those listening, thanks for being here, and as always, God bless.
When ordinary people think of autumn, they imagine shorter days, cozy fires, curling up with a great piece of literature, and basking in the warming scent of cinnamon with shades of burnt orange. which your other half has decided to spend the life savings on to decorate the home for only 2 months. Just as God intended. Yet we must remember that this transition into the frosty abyss of winter creates the perfect conditions for the spread of the pathogen known as Halloween. This disease causes people to dress like demons and go door to door asking for free stuff. This public service announcement aims to give you the correct tool to help you deal with these contagious commie behaviors when they manifest in your local community. First, you'll want to arm yourself with multiple shots of the best-selling paperback on Amazon called The Nephilim Looked Like Clowns. With this PPE, you're fully equipped and well protected to handle what's to come next. Second, have a pumpkin spice latte and white girl autumn your time away in knitted cream shackets and pilgrim hats, because soon enough, Samhain begins. This is when the veil between the spirit realm and the physical world is at its thinnest, and possession, the main symptom of Halloween, is more commonly presented, causing this type of unironic cringe to start happening. Just look at him. This poor soul thinks he looks cool. And if you're not careful, this could be you. Together we can stop the spread of Halloween and flatten the curve. When you see fully grown adults playing dress-up and mirroring unspeakable horrors from beyond the void, remember your training and cure their vapid sense of self-identity by handing them one of our favourably reviewed treatments. Your country must develop herd immunity to seasonal cringe. So, spread the cure far and wide. Just like the cure, this disease does not discriminate by age. Emulating the infected, you will see children running around in bedsheets, knocking on doors, begging for sugary treats, and threatening to damage your well-earned property. Make sure to fill their novelty buckets with the one thing all children secretly want: a well-rounded and relatable education in biblical history. That'll stop the spread. The Nephilim Look Like Clowns and the inevitable boost of volumes are currently the only known cure to thinly veiled demon channeling holidays. This is your best defense against this pandemic of spooky proportions. All you have to do is trust the science. Which you know we did, because I'm showing you people wearing lab coats and looking serious. Get your copy on Amazon today and be prepared for tomorrow. Side effects of reading The Nephilim Look Like Clowns include, but are not limited to, a feeling of existential crisis, a well-rounded knowledge of a Christian contrarian view on human history, a foundational understanding of spiritual warfare, and a healthy aversion to clowns.